Hi, folks. This is the Team House, episode 113. I'm Jack Murphy here with Dave Park. Apologize that we're a few minutes late tonight. No big deal, though. We're going to roll right into the episode. We're really excited tonight to be able to speak to our guest, Gene Yu. Gene is a former 1st Special Forces Group officer.
Hold on. We got no audio.
Right now we have no audio?
Now we just got 3 no audios in a row. Can you guys hear us?
I can hear you.
Sounds up. All right. We're good. All right, let's start from top.
Okay. So, guys, this is episode 113. I'm Jack Murphy here with Dave Park. Our guest tonight is Gene Yu. He is a former 1st Special Forces Group officer. He is the CEO of Blackpanda, and he is the author of the Yellow Green Beret book series. Gene has had a whole series of wild experiences, really, a very colorful career that you've had thus far, Gene. I really enjoyed reading your book, and I've enjoyed, following your exploits, really. I mean, there's a whole series of different things that we'll get into here, your time both in and out of uniform. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, it's my honor to be here. Thank you, Jack. Appreciate it. Also nice to meet you, Dave.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
So our first question, Gene, we ask all of our guests is for their origin story. If you could tell us where you grew up, what your upbringing was like, and sort of how that molded you and propelled you towards the military eventually.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Concord, Massachusetts, up in New England, which is the location where the Revolutionary War started. So it's actually a quite patriotic place for being in a liberal area of the States. I always like to tell the story that growing up as a kid, I'd walk to the bus station in the mornings, and one of my neighbors, where I would cut through the lawn, would have a flagpole with the American flag up, and I would stand there and say the Pledge of Allegiance on my way to the bus stop as well, to make sure to hit it, on the way into school as well, and so I think that's honestly is where some of my patriotism came from, was growing up in New England and being around all the history of the Revolutionary War starting, and just kind of being inculcated with that, in my education growing up, as a child. When I was 10, I moved out to Northern California, and basically kind of finished out the second half of my childhood in the Bay Area. I grew up in Cupertino, so it's the heart of Silicon Valley. So I started programming in Pascal and Fortran when I was like 10. My parents are both computer engineers, and kind of came up in this other world, I guess, so to speak, in the Bay Area, being very tech centric. Something I'd like to share as well is that, and actually I'd be curious to know what you guys think about this as well. I didn't realize it was legal for public schools to restrict military recruitment onto campus, right? Which doesn't make sense to me as a public school, but in my high school actually restricted military recruiters onto campus. And so there's very little, and this is Northern California, right?
Right.
There's very little influence or exposure to the military. And so in terms of I guess an origin story of how I became attracted to the military wasn't through anything from the normal recruiting or around and whatnot. It actually, for me, was coming across a book called Honor and Duty, which is written by an Asian American named Gus Lee, who went to West Point back in the 60s, right? And had grown up, kind of in that era, and had written a book, semi-fictional, about his own experiences when he went to the school. And when I read the book, I had never heard of West Point, which is crazy, right? Again, growing up in Northern California, there's very little exposure to the military. And so I read this book when I was, I think, a sophomore, junior in high school. And when I was reading it, I remember thinking that this is a book kind of like Hogwarts from Harry Potter. It's like, holy shit, there's a school that just literally in every aspect tries to turn you into not only a scholar, but also a warrior and all these type of things. And so I was pretty taken by the book and the story, but I didn't realize, I didn't think that West Point was a real place. So I finished the book and just thought it was a fictional story. And, and I know it's funny, right? And,
yeah.
But this is how liberal Northern California is, right? So, I played very competitive tennis when I was growing up, and I was recruited by a lot of top schools and all this type of stuff. At one point I was nationally ranked and, top 10 in Northern California, et cetera. So West Point sent a recruiting letter, and I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, this school is real. So I was looking into it further, and Went out for a recruiting trip, and I'll pause after this West Point story. But I went on the recruiting trip. I was recruiting at both the Naval Academy and West Point. And to be honest, as a 17-year-old kid, the things that were attracting me about the military was just, how cool I thought the uniforms were. And I was thinking about going to the Naval Academy because I thought the uniforms looked better than West Point's, which is the gray, kind of drab thing. And so I visited the Naval Academy first. I had an interesting experience there, kind of living in the barracks and seeing what the midshipmen were going through. When I went to West Point, the thing that struck me was nobody cared at all about my experience. Like I was kind of like escorted around quite a bit when I was in the Naval Academy and recruited and everything. When I showed up to West Point and stayed in one of the rooms, they were just like, hey man, do whatever you want. We don't care about you. If you want to come here, you come, you know what I mean? If you want to take on the challenge, you take it. And that morning that I did be able to roll out at like whatever it was, 5:30 or 6 in the morning. And I remember going outside into one of the areas where formation was being held first thing in the morning, and it was pitch black and snow was coming down heavily. And all the cadets were standing out there in the overcoats, just stoic, standing there just like, this is nothing. And I remember being like, this sucks, but this is hardcore. This is a military academy, right? Not what I saw at the Naval Academy, et cetera. And weirdly, that is what attracted me because I wanted to do something really hard, right? And I think that I would imagine, the same thing for you guys as well. Military experience is eventually one of the reasons why we went was because we wanted to accomplish something or do something so hard that nobody could talk shit to us about again, right? It's just something that you could stand on for the rest of your life and point at and be like, I did that, right? And I can be proud of that. And you can't take that away from me for the rest of my life. And that's something for me to stand on. So maybe I'll just pause there because that question's so broad, Jack. I don't
Sure. No. This is great.
I think one of the things that everybody who's listening to this probably wants to know is, was the recruitment letter from West Point delivered by an owl or an eagle?
Yeah, I mean, it was snail mail, old school back in the day, right, in 1997. But it came in with a brochure, I remember, and just being like, it was actually kind of tacky, to be honest, compared to other schools because it's government, as you guys know, courier font, right, font size,
right.
Everything is looking like that. But there's an element of that, of a bit of that idyllic, romanticism of how old school the place was, right. Seeing it even in that font and the way they did things. In retrospect now, and you guys know this, having been have served as well, that just somebody just didn't update it and get with the times. Right. At the time, it actually served as a strong recruiting tool because I was like, man, you guys are really OG and old school. And that attracted to me, the tradition and just how things were always done in a certain way. And I wanted to be part of that story, right? I wanted a piece of that. Right. I wanted my identity to be rolled up a part of that stronger and bigger brand above me, right? So
now, when you read Honor and Duty, that's the name of the book, right? Honor and Duty.
Yeah.
Were you also, before that or after that, were you reading other military books? Did you have an interest in the military, or was it up until like West Point sent you the letter that you go, oh, I can do that?
Yeah, for me, actually, I was not a military, aficionado or anything like that. I actually showed up at West Point and thought, hey, they'll teach me everything when I get there, right? So I remember showing up and not knowing the difference between a sergeant and a captain, sort of thing, which obviously didn't work out well day one, where everybody is very well prepared showing up and has read up on all of this or come from, Army families and all this type of stuff. So I was very much a fish out of water. The things that I read when I was researching West Point was I read books that talked a lot about the sports cultures, because that's actually where I found the most content, was about like the Army-Navy game. It was a very interesting book, talked about like just the history of the rivalry between West Point and Annapolis. And that helped me kind of ferret out like, what are the cultural differences and what's a better fit for me? Those are the type of research I did. I didn't read up a lot about the Army itself. It took actually West Point itself to change my mindset and make me think, oh yeah, actually the Army is something that I, am not only am I going to be an officer in, but something I should care about and something a bit more meaningful in terms of the learning and growing that I could do in terms of the challenges. Anyway, so I guess what you're getting at, to try to answer your question, Dave, is that I was not a military kid. Right. I was not a kid that was like soldier, blah, blah. I was just like, look, honestly, I always describe myself as like the most average Asian kid you could imagine growing up in Cupertino, California, and that whole society. Like down here, by the way, and I am in San Francisco right now. So when I say down here, I'm actually physically here. Where I grew up, my high school was like 60% Asian, right? Like I grew up in like a little Asian American bubble where it's Asians that speak English like me and operate like this way, but we're our own little ecosystem, I guess, so to speak, in Silicon Valley. And so coming out to West Point was a massive eye opener in terms of just the rest of the country and like being going from 60% to now I'm like 2%, in terms of the minority and all this type of stuff. And all that was very eye opening and shocking. And it was my evolution at the time at West Point where I started to get into the Army and start realizing there's a lot of interesting things here that could challenge me well beyond where I thought that, sport or academics could ever push me. And then, of course, 9/11 happened when I graduated and the whole world changed and all bets were off.
So that was your senior year at West Point, 9/11?
Yeah, exactly. So I graduated June 2nd, 2001. And then a few months later, right, all of us remember exactly where we were. I was a brand new butter bar lieutenant in docking at Fort Knox, getting ready for the Armor Officer Basic Course. I was sitting in the Emergency Operations Center. If you guys remember, you go through courses, you snowbird and blackbird, et cetera. I was snowbirding before the Officer Basic Course started, and classic form, just doing random CQ duties around posts and everything. So that day I got assigned the Emergency Operations Center, which ended up being the nexus of all the senior officers that come to at Fort Knox to plan what they were going to do because of 9/11. And as you might imagine, it was just a bunch of chickens with their heads cut off running around and talking about how they had to protect the gold and all these rumors going around like, oh, what's next is they're going to come after the gold at Fort Knox with an armor up, right? All the over megalomania, self-importance.
Like Cobra Commander.
Yeah,
exactly. Like, oh, they're coming here now. And hey, Lieutenant, are you keeping a log on this? I'm just like, dude, look, this, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm just here in CQ and answering the phones. But that was my experience, when 9/11 happened. But yeah, the whole world changed for you guys and us as well. My whole mentality of this being a game changed on 9/11. It's like, okay, what are we doing here? It's guns up. It's guns up and just roll out. Right?
Yeah.
So,
Did you choose armor, or was that like, how did you end up in armor?
yeah. So at West Point, and I'm pretty open about this. I discovered later on that my personality is more of an infantry type of fit. I like being very physical. I like being outdoors active. I'm one of those people who's very mechanically uninclined. I look at a car and I'm just like, yeah, I'm aware there's an engine and transmission. It interests me not at all to learn about the inner workings of the car. I'm just happy to drive it and that's it. So actually I discovered in the armor community, most of the personalities are very mechanically inclined, right? You love vehicles, like you're passionate about, trucks and how these all things work. And when you have that, you can imagine, right? If you're that type of person, that a tank is an incredible technological feat,
right.
A 60-ton beast that just rolls around at 60 miles per hour, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm trying to share is that even though my personality and my personal interest seemed to be more on a light fighting standpoint, I was so turned off by the way that West Point presented infantry that I wanted nothing to do with it, right? It was all these very strict, conventional, rigid infantry officers with high and tights who talk nothing about, would incessantly just talk about how important Ranger School was and how you were not a real, basically, and especially at that time period, very much non-PC, right, in the 90s, how you're not a real man if you didn't go to Ranger School and all this type of stuff. And it just got I just wanted to throw up in my mouth. It was just too much, you know what I mean? It was just this alternative army, strict, high and tight.
Like you're joining a cult or something, yeah.
Yeah, it was just I didn't really get it, you know what I mean? Like why they were so, so intense about all of this. And so I was influenced by a few, for whatever reason during the time period I was there, a lot of the history professors were armor officers, right? And I just happen to have some really awesome history professors who were armor guys, and they ended up actually being, I saw their names in the credits of the movie Fury as being the choreographers, because if you've seen that movie from an armor officer perspective, that is an amazing tactical armor movie, right? Tank movie. It's one of the better ones that I've seen. They made sure to add in all the the kind of like the dream tanker, kind of scenarios and battle scenarios, everything like that. And when I saw my old West Point professors' names pop up on the credits, I was like, of course, right? Like, they're the ones who even showed or talked to me about that, all that. So I really was inspired by those guys, and I thought like, oh, okay, well, I transitioned in my time at West Point where when I first went, like I was saying, I was not an Army dude, right? I just wanted to be a computer programmer in the Army, wherever that was. And in the Army, the closest branch you can get to would be Signal Corps for that. So like before I went to West Point, my plan was to become Signal Corps officer and then post in Hawaii, get like a motorcycle, ride around, learn how to surf. Like that was my dream, right? And it's also the late 90s where Clinton had downsized half of the Army, and people were getting out actually at West Point. You're supposed to serve 5 years, right? They had this kind of like clause that was going on in the late 90s where cadets were coming in and then able to get out after 2 years. Wow. Like you just had to apply for a waiver to get out after 2 years, right. And then in some cases, cadets were just leaving straight after school, which sounds crazy, right? Because of the government paying all the education and everything like that. But this is the time period when the military was being downsized.
And also the .com boom. So, I mean, there's a lot of jobs.
Yeah, I think just in general, like from a political standpoint, the economy was roaring, right? Like the tech boom was going off in the late 90s. The Cold War, it had ended, right? There's academics like Francis Fukuyama writing these really prolific articles about how the end of war has occurred, right? We're at peacetime forever now that the Cold War is over. So this, if you guys remember, right, that was the mentality of America at the time. And so when I signed up for West Point, I had no intention of going to thinking of going to war, combat, like all these type of things. I thought I was getting a really interesting and challenging 4-year education, and I'd like kind of mess around this Army thing, and maybe go to Hawaii and have an adventure. And then my dream was to come back to Cupertino and work in Apple in a cubicle and just program. That was literally my dream in high school. Like I just want to sit in the cubicle and program and write code. And I changed a lot when I was at school, right? And so, I was inspired by these history professors and whatnot, and started thinking like, that itch inside of, I think a lot of men all share of, wanting to feel like a warrior and all this type of stuff kind of started coming out when I was at school, and more the latter half, because to be honest, I sucked at everything the first year. I got hazed a lot. I was always like the last one out to, I just sucked, like at everything, and got hazed a lot. And so I started kind of catching up and getting used to things by my third and fourth year at school at the academy, and changed my mindset tremendously about wanting to be in combat arms and all this type of stuff. And I was like, I can't make that full leap into infantry. It was just like, the officers I met at school were I just couldn't connect with them at all, and thought that maybe armor was the better route for me to go because of the professors I had met, and it was still front lines, et cetera, but quickly found out that wasn't for me.
So armor was not necessarily your thing, but at the same time, 9/11 had just happened, and you're relating to this sort of warrior archetype. You have this in you that you want to go and be a warrior. What was the next step for you to branch into special forces? How did that come about?
Yeah, so I have to go back to even like attending a ranger school, right, which is not normal for a tank armor officer, right? And so I had this really good friend who actually was a computer science undergrad with me, and we both went armor. And it was like, to be honest, the Fort Knox armored officer course, the basic course, was really uninspiring. It was not well run. And you guys know this, trade-off schools, generally send like career E5 types, that are just kind of homesteading out. They're kind of done and kind of checked out. It was a very just uninspired course. And so in the middle of it, this particular computer science classmate had been egging me to try out for ranger school, right? And so for infantry lieutenants, generally speaking, if you want to slot to ranger school, it's actually like, I think you're almost forced to go to ranger school as an infantry lieutenant, right? You don't really, there's not as much, there's not a lot of room for that, right? And, but from armor, why would you, like the thought process, why would you need to go to ranger school? You're going to be on tanks and, blah, 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 even though, the argument, it's a leadership school, blah, 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 all this stuff. And so, And so the tryouts, this particular classmate, I remember he first he convinced me to go to Ranger School, right? He just called me up and said, "Hey, you're going to be my Ranger buddy for pre-Ranger right here at Fort Knox." And I was like, "I don't know, man. Like I just got off the summer of holiday and all this type of stuff. This sounds kind of, I don't know." And he just goes, "Don't be a pussy." On the phone, right? And as we know, like that will motivate you.
Yeah.
That's a way to motivate you very quickly, right? And you just said it like that, and I was like, "Well, I don't want to be a pussy."
Right.
You know, I'm gonna, I don't want you to think I'm a pussy, so I'm gonna try out for this thing. So I'm pretty proud of the results of all of that. Like, look, armor officers are not generally well suited for this sort of stuff, but we had roughly about like 80, I want to say like 80 to 90 lieutenants show up for pre-ranger on day one, and the guy that was running pre-ranger at Fort Knox was just this hardcore cardio dude. So the workouts for pre-ranger, which were like 3 times a week, we would just be like running at like 7-minute mile paces, like 8-10 miles to warm up. Like that was like just immediately just go, which is actually more hardcore than some of the things that later on. He was just a very, very fit guy and would PT us to death for like 2 hours. A lot of people dropped out. Only 16 armored lieutenants got slots to Ranger School, and I was the only one that graduated.
Wow.
Out of the batch. Yeah. And so when I was at Ranger School, I started getting the sense. I was like, man, maybe I am not as much of a, like to use my friend's word, as a pussy than I thought it was, right? Maybe I'm a little bit harder than I thought I was. And I do, I just went to my West Point 20th class reunion, which happened on 9/11. And I was talking to one of my classmates there who was at Ranger School with me. And he brought up a memory that I have thought about and talked about before, where we were sharing a tree, right? Strong pointing around the tree, as you do, and just laying there for hours and just, talking or whatever, trying to stay awake. And he asked me, he's like, this is in Derby phase, or maybe mountains. And he asked me, he's like, hey man, he's like, do you feel like you've been pushed to the envelope, like to your limit, right? Because that's everything that was talked about Ranger School is it takes you to the limit, like all this type of stuff. And he asked me, he's like, have you been taken to your limit? Like, are you pushed to the very edge? And I looked at him, and I was like, and I smiled, and I was like, I don't think so, actually. And he smiled back, and he's like, you know what, man? Me neither, right? And it was one of those like brief moments where we realized like, yeah, this sucks, but we have a little bit more, I've got more, I can go a little further. I can go a little bit longer, and when I, actually, to be honest, kind of luckily just got strong platoons, but I graduated True Blue out of Ranger School. I still had that itch, I was like, man, maybe I'm a little bit tougher than I thought I was, when I was the Asian kid growing up in Cupertino and everything like that. And by this time the war had started, right? I finished Ranger School in like April 2002, but I'm stationed in Korea, and Korea is in the hardship tours, and I'm patrolling the DMZ and all this type of stuff. So I'm out of the fight or whatever. Although in the initial days, unbeknownst to us, we thought Afghanistan, if you remember, in the early days, was over in like 2 months. Right. Right. Like the CNN, the green video, the night vision videos of Rangers parachuting in and taking the airfield, and it was just over. And while I was in Korea, the invasion of Iraq started in 2003, and that was the big one for my class of 2001. If I think about it from the West Point side, pretty much my whole class went to Iraq in that first thing. But I was left out in Korea, right? And I felt immense amounts of guilt, right, being out there and not participating. Yeah. Now, of course, the Thunder Run and everything like that was over very briefly as well. And then there's the movement into counterinsurgency operations in Iraq. And I started hearing the stories about how artillery platoons and units were being turned into infantry units and patrolling the streets. Or even I heard some stories about transportation companies, even, right, logistics companies being transitioned into infantry units patrolling the streets. And I was like, okay, I'm definitely going. Okay, I'm not not participating in this thing because I'm still super pissed off about 9/11 and believe it was all tied together, right? And but if I'm going over there, I'm not walking around with a bunch of tankers, okay, who refuse to get off the tank, who are watching my six and don't know anything about patrolling. And it's like, I need the NCOs, they're experts at this, right, to go forward. And so that's when I started thinking like, well, I speak fluent Chinese, right? Asian, I think that maybe, like I was saying, maybe I'm a little bit tougher than I thought I was. maybe the Green Berets is a good place for me, you know, in terms of the skill set of just who I am. And let me just go try out. And if the Army thinks or SF thinks I'm good enough, then actually I feel like it's almost like my duty and responsibility to serve in the regiment, because so few people can pass all those courses. So why don't I just try? And then if they deem, right, that I'm worthy, then that's the best place that I can serve, right? That was my mentality. It wasn't even so much that. Now, of course, I love being a Green Beret, Green Beret SF, all that stuff. I'm so proud of all of that. But when I went in and decided to throw my hat in the application for selection and all that type of stuff, my mentality was not like, oh, I'm a badass, like I should be a Green Beret, whatever. It's more like, oh, well, hey, we all have our roles to fill here, and if I'm measured, weighed, and decided that this would be the most appropriate place for me, then this is where I should serve, right? And that's sorry, a very long answer, but that's my route into SF coming from.
That actually seems, though, like a very resilient, mentally resilient way to go into a selection, because I think so many people put so much pressure on themselves whenever they go into like a selection course. And and Jack and I, like, we've talked to people and tell them, like, treat it like it's just part of the job. Don't treat it like it's this big mountain you have to climb to get to where you want. Just treat it, because there are days on the job that are worse than any selection. So just treat it like a day on the job.
That's right. And I think you guys saw this as well. Just as a kind of a side comment, one of the things I was quite surprised about in my experiences at the so-called hard schools, right? Like whether it be selection or ranger school, is how many people quit before it even starts. You guys gonna remember that?
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
yeah.
Right. That's shocking.
Or after an SFAS.
After a hard event.
Like you remember at nights staying inside those Quonset huts out there at Camp McCall, and it's like there's nothing going on. It's just that in between moment where you can catch up on some sleep, and guys would tap out and they'd quit, because it's in their head.
Yeah, and you'd see that you'd see it rip. You do this like ball buster road, basically road run, a ruck run, for 12 miles, where everybody, people are falling out because of heat exhaustion, and you get to the end of it, and then dudes quit. It's like, well, if you were why didn't you quit like in the middle of that thing?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
it's a really interesting cycle. I would love to see some data out of this, somebody to stay around it about the psychology of us being our own worst enemy. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Like just like my example that I like to use in this scenario is I went to selection twice. I failed the STAR exam the first time, and I run it back. And the way it was for me, I had to wait a year before I come to selection. I did 2 winter. Sorry, I screwed that story up. The first time I went in a summer selection, and I had to wait 6 months. I went to a winter. But I remember in both the summer and the winter courses, more the winter. But if you recall, they just like have you come out and stand in formation, and then like nobody comes out to talk to you, and you're just like standing at the formation for a long time, wondering what the hell's going on, right? And it's all right there to mess with you, right? But especially in the cold, right? People would just quit from standing out there in the cold.
Yeah.
And I remember just like watching them like go walk forward and just quit and be like, what are you doing?
Right.
And then like, no, I can't do this anymore. It's just, and you can just see it and you realize that they just had these demons inside, just that voice, right? That voice that's in your head, who's the biggest asshole that you've ever met, is constantly telling you you're not good enough, causing doubt in your head, causing you to be anxious and all this type of stuff. That voice for those people was so loud they couldn't take it anymore, and nothing had happened, and just walked forward and just didn't believe in themselves and quit. And it really shows the value of just trying. Right? Just willing to put up your hand and just try, right? And that anyway, that's what I would share.
Clearly,
just real quick for our viewers who don't know what the STAR course is, or it's just a long distance land navigation course through really, really rough terrain. And a lot of guys, because you're using a map and a compass to navigate long distances, and it's actually, land navigation courses are easy to fail if you are not like
that last SFAS class they run before Christmas Exodus. It's a little cold and wet. It wasn't. No, it's not fun. No. No.
Yeah, it's really rough. I think so Yeah, most land navigation exams in the regular Army, right, in my experience, at least in the 90s, right, was there would be like a large fluorescent orange sign on a tree, like
Right.
20 feet up, nailed there, right? And that would be the point that you have to find. You could see it so far away. And then a lot of the land navigation courses were on terrain, like small areas where it's been used so often, like whether it be a Benning or, wherever, not whatever.
Right.
And you would just get close to the point and there'd be like a little trail there. And
Right.
it's like,
It's like an animal run.
Yeah.
yeah. It's like, oh. And then also the way that they would run the courses where it'd be like, everybody generally were around the same points. So when you got closer to a point, you'd see like 4 other dudes kind of walking in the same direction you are. And you'd kind of quietly, unofficially check together and kind of like, yeah, we're all kind of going the same direction, kind of, okay, I'm being validated that you think it's the same, right? And you get in. But the STAR exam, if you remember, is a individual, an SF guy, camping out in some camouflaged, relatively camouflaged tent, that is near the, well, where the point is, and being as quiet as possible, right, in that space. In the summer, right, if you go to do the STAR exam, the foliage is so thick, you need to pretty much walk right on top of the point to see the point, right? There's no vectoring in from a distance, and there's also nobody around you because the distance are so far. Anyway, I could go on and on. I have a lot to say about STAR exams.
So, Gene, you did make it through selection on the second try. You were potential Special Forces material there, make it into the Q course. And there's one story I'm not going to let you out of this without telling. And so folks out there listening to this, I first heard about Gene, not by name, but I heard about him because he was a few courses ahead of me. And they were lecturing us in SEER school not to be like this certain student. Don't do what he did. And that turned out to be Gene. I didn't find out it was him until I was reading his book many years later. But Gene, could you tell us the infamous SEER school story from the horse's mouth, from the man himself, the legend around Camp McCall?
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. So I guess like the first, okay, look, it's winter, when you're on the evasion course, nobody is really living off the land that well, right? Like everything is picked, whatever you could remember from the PowerPoint classes about what you can eat in the woods. It's like day 7 or 8 or something. And if you recall, there's dog teams tracking you and you're running through the woods. We found a place to rest and we wanted to build a fire, right? And so I grabbed two guys and we went out to go look for firewood. When we were wandering out, we started hearing like Latin music, right? And realized, oh, there's some people here. And it's the middle of nowhere, right? It's Western North Carolina, and my thought process was like, we should go towards that music because there might be just some random people who are squatting on the Fort Bragg military reservation and they might have food, right? They're not supposed to be there. Maybe we can kind of, if they're not going to be friendly, maybe we can coerce them.
Blackmail them. You can say it. You can blackmail them.
So we emerge out of these woods, like emaciated, wearing our food, our uniform, our BDUs, and your knife, right? And these guys, there's like a whole bunch of Latino dudes playing soccer, right? And there's an RV there. There's little music, etc., and train tracks. And I do remember that we signed some stuff before we started the course. Don't cross the train tracks. I do remember. I very much. There's no point that I ever claimed that I didn't know you're supposed to cross the train tracks. And I just mention it because it's like I remember looking at the train tracks and then looking at the dudes across the train tracks and being like, well, it's only 50 meters from the train tracks. You know what I mean? Like maybe like at first, actually, if I recall correctly, we actually went up and stood on the train tracks and tried to talk to them at the edge of the train tracks initially to try to play within the rules. And they're like, what are you doing? If you want to talk to us, just come over here. Anyway, we rolled over there. I speak a little bit of Spanish from spending time overseas in Ecuador when I was in high school. I did this like public health volunteer project, just enough to say like a lot of vocabulary and communicate, right? And okay, so I'll try to keep this short. So basically, we built a bit of rapport, right? Speaking Spanish. One of the other guys with me was actually a fluent Spanish speaker, so both of us were kind of doing our thing, talking to different people. And eventually I was like, okay, look, let's cut this shit. We're extremely hungry. We've been trying to survive for like 8 days. Do you guys have any food, here at all? And it's like, look, we're really sorry. We just had a party, but we can take you to the local tienda down the store, right? The local store down the road, sorry. And so we're like, okay, it sounds pretty close by. And they're like, oh, in fact, we'll drive you, right? And we're like, oh, wow, that's really nice. So we pull up the pickup truck, and the three of us jump in. And he starts rolling out, but he gets on the hardball and starts rolling out at like 60 miles per hour, right? I thought it was like around the corner, right. The way he said, maybe because my Spanish is not good, whatever. So just think about this, right? Like we're like, oh shit, and I'm looking at the two dudes with us, and they're just like, I don't know, and I'm like, I don't know too. I mean, like, and I remember at the time having this thought, like, this is a major watershed moment in your life. What do you choose to do? Right. And I wasn't sure which way it was going to be. Like it was like a spirit was talking to me, like, this is a big moment, Gene. What are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to see where this road takes us. This is just so interesting. And so we roll in, and where we end up is Aberdeen. Which is a major town in Western North Carolina. It's far.
Yeah, like from the evasion course is out in Carthage.
That's right. Aberdeen is far, man. It's like 60 miles.
Yeah.
So it's a long drive. Like I think we actually fell asleep on the way over there. Anyway, so we get there, and I'm in survival mode. So I'm thinking like we need like gruel. I just want like bread and like meat and maybe like cheese. Mm-hmm. So let's roll into this like gas station. Okay. And let's go in there and see what we can do. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't know, we're in survival school, right? So I'm like trying to kind of like, role play. I'm even thinking like, maybe we should just steal a bunch of food, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and just be guerrilla, whatever. If you recall, when they strip search you before the evasion course, all you have is your ID card and then the knife, right? And so I had memorized my credit card number because at the time, I was ordering a lot of stuff online, and you have to manually enter it in the early 2000s every single time. And so at one point, I just realized that I memorized maybe like 12 of the numbers, and I was tired of getting up every time to go find my wallet. So I was just like, I just sat down for like 5-10 minutes, wherever, and then just memorized it, and then it reinforced it every time I was entering my credit card number. So that's why I had a memorized credit card number. I was accused later on that I'd like plotted this whole thing like it's a huge deal to memorize your credit card. It's not that hard. It's 16 numbers, right? Like and a date and then 3 numbers. It's not that crazy. And so I had also so in this gas station, I roll up with my ID card, and the young high school aged female attendant is like, okay, who's this dirty Asian dude in BDUs like coming up and showing me this ID card and asking me to buy bread and ham, using a memorized credit card. She just basically was like, can you please leave and call the cops, right? So we leave the gas station, and I tell the driver, I'm like, hey man, okay, that didn't work, but I know is there a Papa John's pizza in this town? Because I know where I live in Fayetteville, I call Papa John's Pizza all the time, and I just give my credit card number over the phone, and they're good to go. Uh-huh. So logic would tell me that if I just tell you face to face, I know it's weird that I'm face to face telling you, but technically you should still process it. So he says yes, and so we drive down to a small Papa John's in Aberdeen. I walk in, I ask for the manager, negotiate. She thinks it's weird, but says, you know what, you're right. There's no difference between calling on the phone and doing it in person. Fine.
And they want to support the troops.
Yeah, that too, right? And so at this point, I'm like, okay, cool. Well, now it's gloves off, right? Like credit card number. Like, I'm taking care of all the boys. I bought like 10 large pizzas, all these buffalo wings, all this like, drinks, right? Because it's just like, well, it's unlimited, right? It's unlimited. And so I bought like something like $300 worth of pizza or whatever. And so I actually also even added charge and tip the drivers. I give them like $40 in cash or something. So we roll back now to the training area, and now we've been gone for a long time, right? And if you remember, like this is a little bit like we just went off to go get wood, and our team is probably thinking we got eaten by a bear or something like that. When we come back in with these 10 pizzas, everything like that, I always tell this in this way. I've never seen grown men jump in the air for joy before.
Right.
Until that, there's actually a question on the SF psychological exams, all the little bubble ones. I remember they asked you, have you ever physically jumped in the air for joy before? And I remember being like, hell no, who the hell does that? and when we came back, all of the team members were jumping in the air, celebrating, whatever. Like, it's just the greatest thing ever, right? So we ate and inhaled all the food. I'm not even kidding, like probably 5 minutes, right? It was the best pizza I've ever tasted in my entire, maybe best food I've ever tasted in my entire life. Inhaled that shit and then threw all the trash into the fire to burn all the evidence, right? The next day we got picked up to go to the RTL, right? And so if you guys recall, there's a part of it where they strip search you naked and hose you down, blah, blah, blah stuff. So for whatever reason, I forgot to get rid of the receipt, right? And I had weirdly, which nobody ever does, right, in that BDU uniform, I took the receipt and put it in my left upper breast pocket, which nobody uses. I remember, right? Nobody uses the BDU pockets, right? It's just not used. It's like this weird fashion statement on the BDU that nobody uses, right? And so I put it in there for whatever reason and forgot about it. And when they found that receipt, they're like, this is weird. This is $300 pizza yesterday. It just doesn't make any sense, right? They let me go through the RTL for probably like almost a good half of it, right? Like I'd seen a lot at the RTL.
At the POW camp.
Yeah, the POW camp, where you get, beaten and whatever. You're practicing POW resistance techniques. And so when they pulled me out, they pulled me in a room and I thought I was getting like some extra hard interrogation or something like that. And the SEER commander, the officer in charge, suddenly appeared. It's like, do you know who I am? Do you remember who I am? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yes. And then he throws the receipt on the table and I see it. And I'm like, okay, my rule is, and I did this at West Point the whole time as well, I will break almost all the rules in pretty egregious ways. But if you ever catch me, okay, I will immediately tell you everything.
Yeah.
I won't lie about it. It's kind of like a weird thieves code that I have. Obviously it's not technically, full integrity to break the rules that you agree to adhere to, but I like breaking rules. But if you catch me, I will never lie about it.
Right.
And so they threw the receipt and immediately I'm like, yep, you got me. This is exactly what happened. And the officer, as you would imagine, officers, they were like just getting angry and angrier as I'm telling the story. Whereas like the first sergeant and the NCOs are like high-fiving each other, laughing. Just like, can't get like, it's just such a different scene, in the room while people are just reeling from me just unloading the whole reality. Because what I found out later is they were so confused. They didn't know what to do, right? Because they found this, they're like, this can't be real, but it is real. And then also, this was during the surge, right? This is 2000. Well, Jack, I think you're pretty close to me in the Q course dates, right? So if you remember, they're trying to push as many SF guys as possible. We didn't get more SF guys because the funnel is the funnel, but they were trying, there's a lot of political pressure trying to get more SF. This is like John Kerry ran for president, and one of the things was on his campaign was, I'm going to double special operations, right? If you remember this time period. And so there's a lot of pressure on the officers to graduate, right? Because I'm literally, that SEER school at that time, I don't know what it's like now, but at that time, that was the last phase of the whole qualification course.
Right. So you've been in training now for well over a year. 2 years.
Yeah, almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Almost 2 years.
Right.
Plus the language training, all that type of stuff, right? And so, or maybe actually more 18 months, right? Because I skipped the language training. But it's a long time, right? And you've gone through a lot of gates, right? A lot of people have fallen by the wayside. And now I'm like one of the very few officers, right, that is about to graduate. And they're like, do we bring this up or do we just let this gate? And it's interesting because later on I befriended a lot of these people and got the whole story from their side. And apparently they went through like vigorous debate for like 2 days. Like, what do we do here, right? And ultimately what they decided to do was like, you know what? Let's just ask Gene what the hell, right? And just put the receipt. And they were shocked that I was just like, oh, this is what happened. Right. They were surprised that I was so open about it. And then they were shocked at that point too of what to do.
Right.
And so in a follow-on meeting with the commander of SEER school, he asked me, he's like, hey man, like officer, what would you do? And I gave him the straight up answer, like, you must give me a never to return, right? Like you must make an example of me. That's the standard stock answer, right? It's like, you must give me a return, but you should allow all the NCOs that are on my team to come back to SEER, because initially they kicked out everybody in the whole team, right? So that's exactly what they did. They gave me a never to return, and then all the NCOs had to recycle into they got into the very next SEER class, right? And so how did I get back in, right? And all of that, right? So when I was in Korea, I had a short, unique time period where I kind of finagled my way as an armor lieutenant to, more like in civilian terms, the best way to describe it was I was an intern at a unique special forces detachment in Korea called Special Forces Detachment Korea.
Right.
And it's a unique team. It's not an ODA really, right? It's a team of all generally post team sergeant E8s, right, filled out the team, and each one is a special advisor to a Korean Special Forces brigade around the country. Very interesting kind of liaison team in Korea. I don't even know if it's still around. But,
no, it's still around.
Yeah.
It's still around? Okay. Mm-hmm. So I finagled my way down there to be the XO, or executive officer, which really didn't mean anything. They don't need an XO. So I was just like this extra lieutenant down there. But I built a rapport when I was down there with the Special Operations Command Korea Chief of Staff, whose name is Colonel Rick Thomas. And he was the ascending first group commander, right? And so he was the one that actually helped facilitate all that of me getting into that unit. During the week that you leave, that you're supposed to leave, or you're allowed to leave to go back to the States on a fully paid ticket home and have that trip, I used that time to volunteer for an exercise to just get coffee, basically, for Colonel Thomas and the officers to try to figure out and learn a little bit more about what SF was, because I couldn't find anything on the internet at the time. I had no idea. I was fascinated by it, but I didn't know exactly. And I did well enough during that exercise. They actually gave me a joint commendation medal afterwards, which is why I randomly had one of those, and then built a relationship with Rick Thomas. And so when I was kicked out of SEER school and never to return, I'm just like, okay, well, I've done a year and a half for my 5-year commitment. I'm just gonna go home. My Army career is over, right? I screwed up. I'm a piece of shit, whatever, I'm done. And so another mentor of mine, Tony Bell, first group, longtime SF NCO, Sergeant Major, when he left, I called him and I was like, hey, Tony, I fucked up, right? He was at Deck K. He was one of my mentors in Korea. And all he said was like, hey man, that's really bad. That's really bad. But what you should do is just email Rick and just say, hey sir, I screwed up. This is what happened. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Some of the wisest advice, right? Not ask for help, anything like that. Just states this is what happened. And if you know, Rick Thomas is one of those guys who's just like remembers everybody's names. He's so caring and empathetic. He responded within I want to say 3 minutes, and was just like, the email was like, give me a phone number I can reach you and don't go anywhere, right? And so he immediately called Camp McCall and was like, hey, I want Gene Yu as captain of my group, right? I don't care what he did, Yeah. And you put him back in the next class that you can get, right? And this is coming from a rising group commander, right, out of one of the 5. And so the SEER commander, against what he wanted to do, brought me back in. And Colonel Thomas called me right afterwards. Go stand in front of the mirror, stand at attention while I talk to you. All this, but I was allowed back in the course. I did receive a general letter of reprimand. I still have it in my files, actually, right here, talking about the whole thing and everything. I don't have that as a piece of pride. It's just an interesting, for me, just a relic of this situation.
Sure.
But I went back, I did a second winter SEER course, which was super.
Did they treat you any differently because of that event?
Yeah. So what I discovered, and having gone through SEER school twice from a student perspective, was that there were slightly different cultures from the different phases of SEER school, right? So like the survival instructors are a certain way, the evasion guys, resistance, whatever. It was the evasion guys were super pissed because they want to see you living off the land from the stuff that they teach you, right? There's the survival guys were more like, they were split where they're like, well, you took the spirit of survival.
Right.
I say you improvised and overcame.
Yeah, I would say that the lesson, the lesson, the mistake wasn't going to get pizza. Like the mistake, and for Sear, the mistake was having the receipt.
He literally kept
and
the
not having a
receipts.
story for it.
Literally kept the receipts.
Yeah. I mean, but really,
It's like
getting
literally
pizza-
the evidence.
Yeah.
It's literally
Right.
the documented listed evidence that you would even use in a lawsuit.
Right. So, but if you say I found this receipt blowing on the ground and I kept it because the name is the same as mine and I thought it was so random.
And he could use
I
it
thought
on
it
his
was
tax
so
write-offs.
random
Tax
to find
write-offs
this
at the end of
receipt.
the year.
Right? But honestly, like using locals to go get pizza is really in the spirit of
Proxy forces,
conventional
indigenous
warfare,
forces. you know?
unconventional warfare. You know?
Yeah.
Well-
So you kind of get like both
Yeah.
sides. Like
Yeah,
I would
for sure.
say during like the immediate aftermath, I would say about 50% of people came with that. And then other 50% would come directly in my face and just be like, you're a piece of shit. You're never doing all the stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like this very awkward kind of like in between. And then as time went on in my career, when I proved, I think I proved that I was, I wasn't a total idiot, as a team leader. People would just be like, this funny story about Gene. It was a little bit more enhancing,
Right.
I think, to my persona, I guess.
Sure.
But I never celebrated or, like what I was saying, it was actually, to be honest, all very embarrassing. Like, wasn't seeking this attention, this sort of thing, right? It was, as the way I told it now, I hope, it conveys a bit of the whole target of opportunity sort of thing. We just kind of stumbled into it and just kind of kept on tugging on the string and see where it went, right?
there it is, folks. A Sear School legend, the man himself. You
In
heard
the
it.
flesh.
You heard it here on the Team House.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gene. I'm going to ask you about your Special Forces career and some of the further adventures that you got into there, but I want to take just 2 seconds to tell our audience about the sponsor for tonight's show. It's BLUEBIRD Botanicals. They are a CBD company. They make, there's a chapstick, there's CBD oil, there is a lotion.
The lotion is really nice. I use that lotion a lot. It's a menthol and CBD. It's a full spectrum CBD. Do you use any CBD? Have you used CBD before?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Various products. And
Yeah.
whatnot. Yeah. I think it's quite calming, and I think it's important for veterans, particularly PTSD.
Yeah. I mean, and BLUEBIRD is it's a fantastic company, very pure products, and it's full spectrum. I guess one of the differences is that like with CBD, you need all these different parts of it for it to actually be effective, and a lot of people just isolate it down to like one small part, and so you're not really getting the the full effect.
I use the oil actually before bed, and it helped me sleep quite a bit. Much deeper sleep than normal. So
better than a 6-pack.
yes, and healthier for you also. Much healthier for you. So people who watch the Team House and enjoy the show, you can go to the BLUEBIRD Botanicals website and use the promo code TEAM50. And you'll get 50% off your purchase there.
50% off. And seriously, guys, I mean, especially if you're a veteran, but anybody in particular, like if you have trouble sleeping, if with the oil, if you find yourself getting tense throughout the day, it doesn't it calms you. And then with the oil, they have the lotion, they have like this menthol lotion that has the CBD in it, and I use it on like my arthritic spots, and it really helps. I like it a lot.
So, Gene, after these multiple adventures through the Q course, you graduate. You're a newly minted Special Forces officer, looking to get into the war, but you're in 1st Special Forces Group, which is focused around Asia. And so it took you guys a little bit to get into the fight. Can you tell us about I believe before getting into the Middle East, you spent some time in the Philippines. What were those initial assignments? What was it like arriving on a team in some of those initial deployments?
Yeah. So because of the pizza thing, I was actually still being punished when I showed up to Okinawa and was put on. I was not given a team, right? So I was on probation, right? So at the time, 1-1, which is the forward deployed battalion for 1st Group in Okinawa, was heavily engaged in the Philippines and advising Filipino military forces and dealing with, the Abu Sayyaf, which is offshoot organization down there, right? And so, so I went down there for a punitive tour to be a staff officer, and then just to, on probation while I was down there. Again, fortunately, people realized that, I wasn't a complete idiot and I could do a few things and be of value. And the staff quickly saw that I could write an op order and do some decent planning. And so I got quite involved in helping write a campaign plan. The timing was just as such that the joint forces were planning on embarking on a so-called invasion of the main stronghold island down there called Holo Island. And so when I showed up after settling in for about a month, I immediately got hot and heavy on helping write that entire campaign plan across 6 Filipino battalions and various special operations forces, like 500 or so that were coming across amphibious landing craft and then hitting the beach and coming up and trying to take out this, this one defensive position where, supposedly maybe like 40 of the HVTs were bedding down. And so, I ended up being the battle captain for that mission. There was an odd circumstance where the ground force commander had decided to move out to a more remote location to be more forward on the field of operations, and he lost a lot of communication back into the talk. And so, by de facto, as the battle captain and ranking officer in the talk, essentially I became the main locus point, which was a really unique and overwhelming experience, to be honest, because look, I'm 26, you know what I mean? The Jasota P commander, or the commander of all American forces there, 06, we had built a bit of a rapport when I had spent time in the headquarters before going down into Holo, and it's just seeing what happened, and just, man, every day I was just, his operations guy on the ground and executing all the different, movements, et cetera, moving the different, surveillance aircraft around. And it was about 12 days, right, before we ended up calling it quits. It ended up being a big failure of a mission. But I think that even though it wasn't successful, in terms of actually taking out all the Abu Sayyaf at the time, for me, I think I had proven, again, like I said, it was not a complete idiot, and was given a choice of which teams I wanted to join out of that particular company that had been deployed in Holo, which was Bravo Company. And fortunately or unfortunately for me, whatever, how you want to look at it these days, but the one team out of Okinawa that goes to Iraq was in Bravo Company. And so I raised my hand to join that team that was about to deploy to Iraq. So I was, fortunately or unfortunately, my first trip to Iraq was out of that one ODA out of Okinawa that goes into northern Iraq. It's based out of Erbil, Kurdistan. It was meant as a liaison mission via the U.S. State Department to work with the Korean Special Forces. What I just described is literally all the information there was about this mission. There's actual cable from the State Department saying just lace with Korean Special Forces. So it was completely open-ended. I think that in retrospect, it was one of probably the most creative and most autonomous SF missions in theater, if not maybe elsewhere as well. I mean, there's literally no mandate of what you're to do. And as a first group team, we were attached underneath either 5th group or 10th group, which were the rotating groups in Iraq. And they were just like, who's this random first group team from Okinawa, right? That shows up as attached to my battalion or company or whatever, and what is your mission? So there's a lot of creativity for each team leader from Okinawa that comes in and changes the nature of the mission according to what they think is the most pressing thing. For me, showing up in late 2007, and into 2008, that was during the surge, right? And so for me, it was like, look, we got to just get into the fight, man. Like, we got to be in Mosul, we got to be down south in places like Hawija and Kirkuk and whatnot. And so we trained up a group of Peshmerga, right, the Kurdish folk out there, and built a couple strike forces. And yeah, we were out as much as we could, crossing the border, across the green line from Kurdistan into Iraq, and hitting targets in eastern Mosul and in south, and trying to contribute our piece to it. Yeah, there's a lot more to it, but I just kind of pause there.
Yeah, you point out in the book that the South Korean government wanted to support the coalition and, we're one of America's partner forces and all this. But at the same time, it was politically unacceptable for them to have any casualties coming home. So it sounded like you were in kind of a interesting spot as a liaison, that you're working with these South Korean special forces guys who want to go kick some ass with you. But when it's time to go and do the missions, you kind of like have to wave goodbye, go do your thing, because they're not allowed to leave the base.
Yeah, that's right. When I was there on the trip, we actually did very little joint work with the Korean special forces. We're meant to do so, but because of the political sensitivity of for the Koreans in terms of participating in the Iraq War, there was an actual mandate that they could not have a single Korean soldier have any type of casualties, right? Whether I think wounded or killed. And that's why, to a certain degree, why the Koreans were in the such a safe region up in Kurdistan, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of political pressure around their presence and involvement in the war. And so we were actually handcuffed at the beginning of the trip because the 10th Group commanders had taken a very black and white line of saying, like, well, your mission is to work with the Korean Special Forces. If they're not willing to come across into the fight, you can't go either. And so we were handcuffed for the first few months. We were getting a lot of good intel and all this type of stuff and getting targets that we wanted to hit, but we'd ended up having to pass them off to other teams or infantry units because we were not allowed to go forward. And then I think it was like May of 2008, if I recall correctly, one of the largest suicide vehicle bomb attacks actually in the theater at the time happened in Erbil, right? A huge truck went out. I can't remember the numbers of how much explosives, but it leveled a few of the buildings, and it was this massive explosion. I remember it was like, I thought that we were under attack actually at the team house. We all ran to the rooftop with our weapons up, everything. I thought we were being attacked. It was so loud, and huge, the reverberations of the explosion. And in retrospect, I think what Al Qaeda was trying to do at the time was there was a lot of we call sectarian conflict, I think was the term, right, between the Shias and the Sunnis, a religious battle, right? And I think that what Al Qaeda was trying to do was hit the Kurds and try to pull them into the fight and make this an ethnic conflict as well, right, between Kurds and Arabs, right? Trying to make greater chaos. That was the MO or the mission or the strategy of Al Qaeda, was to create as much chaos as possible, and in the middle of the chaos, try to grab power where they can, right? So after that explosion, that attack, the Koreans buttoned up, right? Like they just like, holy shit, like I can't believe the fight came here.
Thanks, man.
Getting on the base became a sudden like major issue because their security was so high, but I won't delve into that right now. So what I was able to do was, because I had built not a rapport, but I had met the 2-star Korean general who was in charge of the base, and realized this might have been an opportunity where let us present the intelligence that we've been able to collect about what's going on outside, which the Koreans cannot access because you're not out there and you're not engaging in the community and all this type of stuff. So I gave him a report, and he read the report, and like the next day called me for a meeting into the office and was like, how did you get all this intelligence? This is invaluable. And I said, well, sir, like we go out and talk to the terrorists, right? Like, we go out and talk to them. And when I say talk to them, I mean like, we should go on missions and capture them and then talk to them, right? And he's like, that's a great idea. You should talk to them. It's like, can you get me more intelligence like this for force protection of the Koreans here? And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I would do. Let me draw up, which I did, a memorandum, right, that authorized from the Koreans that you request my team to go forward and collect force protection intelligence to help your self-defense at your base.
Right.
And in that way is for me to go question terrorists.
Right. Right.
So the implication is now and I took that memo, which he stamped, signed, et cetera, and I drove to, convoyed out to Mosul to brief the 10th Group commanders, like, look, the Koreans are telling us to go out and gather intelligence. And they agreed with it. And then we were cleared hot from there on to do missions. And it was awesome. It was a great trip. We did 25 raids, if I remember correctly, and, picked up a lot of bad dudes. And it was very, very fulfilling of a mission, right? So.
Wow, man.
How the Korean morale must have been low, because the SF, the Korean special ops guys, the special force guys, like they're hard dudes. They are warriors, and they must have been miserable not being able to go out and do the job.
Yeah, no, I would say so. I mean, like, I think what's interesting, and maybe because I have this experience of working with foreign militaries as well, is that there's a rapport felt between each other, even though maybe culturally different language, et cetera, et cetera. There's like this warrior kind of understanding between us, right? Is that we're fighters, right? And I felt that, with the Koreans as well. And every time that I came into the base, and he would come and see us, he'd always pound his chest about how badly he wanted to go out with us on the missions. And yeah, we just couldn't take him out,
Yeah.
So to your point, yeah, absolutely correct.
When I was reviewing my highlights of your book in preparation for this podcast, because it was years ago that I read it, you mentioned going back to the Philippines, working with Danilo. I was wondering if that was General Pamonag that you were working with.
Man, I don't remember right now off the top of my head, Jack. I'm sorry. Yeah, no. It was General Ramon Dizon.
Dizon, yeah. No, Dizon's a character, and Dizon remembered you when I talked to him.
Yeah. We actually, he actually worked at Blackpanda for a little bit.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we're doing some stuff in the Philippines, and it was very helpful.
I think he commanded when the Light Reaction Regiment was the Light Reaction Battalion. I think he was commander. And then maybe he came back again. And then he was also in charge of the Presidential Security Group, as I recall.
You're absolutely correct. So he, when I met him and worked with him, he was the Joint Special Operations Group commander. So all of special, their JSOC, right? And I was assigned to him as his advisor, right? Just kind of shadowing him and helping liaison, stuff for him. After he finished that, I think he was at the Presidential Security Group, and then from there he left. He got out.
He retired.
So, yeah. He's sitting on lots of boards as chairman in Philippines now, doing quite well.
I bet he struck me as he's a PMA graduate, of course. Struck me as a very sort of like blue blood officer.
Yeah. He's he comes from the upper crust of society. Yeah, he's just anyways, great guy.
Yeah.
We were able to do a lot of stuff together at Blackpanda as well. Yeah.
Well, we'll get into that in a moment too. I don't know. Before we move on, I mean, we talked about Kurdistan. Was there anything else about the Philippines and working with their soft guys or any other the experiences you had over there that you think are worth mentioning? The Philippines
Mission, I guess, just overall, I think most would agree was fairly frustrating, but really great by way of just the aspect of military diplomacy, right? Mm-hmm. The connections and the deep relationships, which, obviously there's long-standing history as well between the U.S. and the Philippines, but I noticed particularly because, again, sorry, I know we'll talk about later, but doing business there and whatnot, and interfacing with whether it be police or military, there's always extremely positive, just kind of feeling and rapport with U.S. personnel and folk, and I think that's when I look at that, because it's actually, I think the total amount of time was well over 10 years, right? That SF and various other units were operating in the Philippines, and there wasn't really a very clear result, afterwards, right? I think that most would agree right now that Afghanistan was a loss, right? Iraq, questionable, right? These are things that are discussed openly, right? Like in terms of but the Philippines is a funny one where a lot of people don't know about it, and it's just never really had any resolution. Just kind of, whatever, 10 years plus, and then just quietly just went away, and Abu Sayyaf is still there. And I don't know, is that considered a success? I don't know. It's one that's just not discussed very openly. Yeah.
Right. There's so much going on with, we talked about it previously, Gene, about how complicated the politics of the region are. I'd love to get deeper into it another time. But perhaps for the sake of this show, we could talk about getting deployed to Baghdad with a SIF. And it sounded like that was a really interesting experience for you. And again, a first group team being deployed to go do DA ops in Iraq. It took you guys a little while to get there, I guess because of your regional focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It was actually an interesting, I think, cultural dynamic as well, is because first group ended up almost having a bit of a complex about it, right? Because everybody was going, and first group continued being left out. I think it was like the last group to get in, and in that time period that I was there, of course, I think it all opened up, by 2010 or whatever, where everybody was in. But there's a weird time period for about 5 years where first group was kind of getting crapped on, for not going as though it was our choice.
And like guys were like team sergeants were getting out and going to work for Blackwater and stuff because they were upset about it.
Absolutely. There was officers as well that were looking to transfer out of first group after the captain's time because they wanted to make sure to get in the fight and all these sort of things. So we're kind of a weird dynamic, right? And so, yeah, for me, like, again, I got, however you want to look at it, lucky or unlucky, look, I volunteered for all of it, right? So I say that with tongue in cheek, but for the individual missions as well. I actually was planning on trying out for one of the higher level units, and then saw that the SIF that I had just recently joined was planning on going back in the next summer, and the SIF had just done a rotation where it was I don't know. One of the things that was interesting about our chat here is I have no idea where the lines are these days about all this information, but maybe I'll just say like the SIF was in Baghdad the year prior, and then the year I went, we were training and working with the Iraqi counterterrorist force, right? Who had third group and fifth group. I think every SIF by then had already gone through and was training them and building them up and blah, blah, blah. So they were, when we showed up, I mean, these guys were just pipe hitters, when we showed up. You know what I mean? Like, these guys have been doing this for whatever it was, 3 or 4 years straight, day in, day out, and that was a really different experience from being a team out in Kurdistan that everybody just thought was a State Department liaison, the Koreans. I'd go out on missions and I would be lucky if I got like a Kiowa,
right,
as air support. You know what I mean? Like, I'd be like, hey guys, we got Kiowas.
right,
Amazing air support, And then going on the Baghdad trip, if you didn't have the AC 130, right? Like, sometimes the guys on my team who had experiences the year before, they would say things like, I'm not going out there unless there's an AC 130. Like, that's a minimum requirement for me. And it's a very contrasted kind of like, resource element, right? Like, if I were to say my first trip in that era maybe was one of the most under-resourced, ODAs operating, right, by way of resource, and because nobody knew what the hell we were doing up there.
Right.
Going to the SIF mission in Baghdad, we were probably the most resourced, unit at that time.
You guys are getting supported by 160th. You're getting JSOC intel fed to you, all that stuff. Yeah.
And just even the facilities, right? There's like a beautiful gym. There's like all this food and protein shakes and everything like that. Like, before, we're living in like a team house in the middle of Erbil, right? Like, actually in the town, and we're like eating couscous, every day with our little Assyrian local chef, totally different. Like, the first mission was the classic Green Beret, indigenous, intermixed with everybody. And it was what I signed up for, what I'd read by the time I was researching SF about like the Vietnam era, that type of stuff was like what really attracted me. Like, when I saw the first Green Berets on the horses with the scarves, right? Like, riding through Afghanistan, I was like, oh, damn, like, that is hot. Like, I want to do that. Right? That was hot, and so the SIP mission was something entirely different, where it's like, there's nothing, I mean, it was just kicking ass. Like, we just went in and stomped on people every night, and they just fed to you, right? Like, the missions were fed to you, everything's so specialized. And we were out every single night in Sadr City, right? And that was a very different mission, So when I look at my SF career, which was very short, it's a common thing, as you guys know, as a joke, like, oh, officers just summer help. Now, being an older man at this point, that was like a short period of time in life, right? It's like, 4 years for me. But in that time period, I think that I was really fortunate that I saw from my 4 combat tours a really wide range of different missions, like a really wide range, right? Like, the first one, I'm a staff officer planning campaign plans of like 5,000 dudes, and all the logistics and supply chain that come with that, and running a talk and, fire missions and all that. Then what it's like being, a very traditional ODA intermixed with Kurds, and building forces out of like barbers and shepherds, and giving them a, AK and some boots, and then running in and just hitting people. and then back to advising, a high level Filipino special operations group and helping them kind of organize and what all it looks like. And that was a really interesting experience. A couple missions down south on that as well. And then the SIF mission in Baghdad, which was just a straight, sledgehammer going around,
Right.
in and out. It was a very wide range of experiences, which ultimately I think is the reason why I got selected for early promotion. Was more the experience based, less about the quality that it was. I like to think that I feel like I had a very unique time period, experience, which ended up lending to just I guess catching attention even from Big Army, I guess. Yeah.
You mentioned being there for a short time, and actually one of our viewer questions refers to that about 18 alphas. So let's take some, if you don't mind, let's get to some viewer questions real quick. Andrew, thank you very much. Can Gene share any good or funny stories about USMA? I asked Lino Mani this question on a prior episode, and he responded, "There are no good stories about West Point." He really let me down on that one.
Well, I will share that recently I just went to my 20th class reunion, and we're class of 2001, 9/11 just happened, etc. And then literally Afghanistan rolls up this year, exactly 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And so this reunion was incredibly meaningful for me to attend. I live in Singapore these days. I run a cybersecurity company out in Asia, Blackpanda, etc. I've been back home for the summer for various things I've been taking care of business wise, but almost predominantly because of this reunion. I wasn't missing this reunion. Maybe this isn't maybe so funny, but an interesting story about class of 2001, which I'm very proud of being a part of now. I believe, I'm still waiting for somebody to challenge me on this, but I believe class of 2001 is the longest contiguous combat class in the history of West Point now, right? Mm-hmm. 2001 to 2021, right? Mm-hmm. 20 straight years, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that is unique about our class is that during the acceptance day parade, like you finish Beast, which is our boot camp, and then you have this big parade that you come in. At that time, they told us never in the history of West Point has a parade happened and where they told the cadets just turn around and run back into the barracks. Okay, there was a lightning storm where lightning was literally striking the parade ground, and never saw this after parading, doing like I feel a million parades at West Point. But we're standing out there at attention, and suddenly they got on the loudspeaker and were like, "Cadets, about face," and then just start marching back. And then suddenly they got on the loudspeaker like, "All right, cadets, just run, just go." Like the most undisciplined military movement you would ever imagine. And you just see a bunch of cadets just like with their little M1s and the bayonets, like just start running, just a gaggle all the way back in. And so the lore of West Point is that if it rains on your acceptance day parade, it means your class is going to war. Okay, so over the
really
history of that.
So it started a new mythology, basically.
Yeah, so on our class crest, right, for 2001, there's a big lightning bolt in the middle, which this is all pre 9/11, right? We didn't even know. It's just like, because it was such a distinguishing feature of our acceptance day parade. And then actually for our graduation day parade, it also poured on us, which never happens actually, or rarely happens actually in the summer. And it poured throughout our graduation as well. And so this isn't that funny, maybe for this question, but I just thought about it just now because this came up at the reunion, which for me was a seminal experience because I hated West Point. Okay, I wanted nothing to do with that place the moment I walked in and realized what was going on. And I was like, holy shit, why did I sign up for this? And really didn't know what I was getting into, but I have too much shame to quit.
Yeah.
That it's such a big deal about you going. And I would say this for everything, Ranger School, Q course, whatever. I mean, the reason why I never quit was like, I'm too ashamed to quit, to face everybody after I quit.
Right.
So I'll just do this until I die, because I'd rather die than go out and face everybody with the embarrassment of having quit. And so, look, I hated it at West Point. When I graduated and threw that white head in the air and drove away, and I thought I would never return to West Point ever again when I saw in the rear view. And going back for the 20th, man, like that place is really special.
Yeah.
You know, like it's hallowed grounds to me now, like as a, relatively middle-aged man at this point, and looking back at my life and how crazy all the last 20 years has been, that place is hallowed grounds, man. It really is something that I didn't think, it told me at the time that I would love it later on, but definitely not at the time.
Yeah.
You know, I joke around all the time. People ask me like, oh, how was West Point? I'm like, well, it was a minimum security prison with a strong vocational training program. That's what it was. We were prisoners, right? We're literally prisoners, okay? And just shoved all this vocational education just like constantly down your throat 6 days a week and all the, like every, year round for 4 years, right? So.
Gene, out of curiosity, coming from a predominantly Asian community in Silicon Valley, how did your parents and your friends react to your decision to go to West Point?
Yeah. So I actually forged my parents' signature to go to West Point.
No shit. Wow.
Yeah, which I just, I guess, admitted to just government perjury if they want to come after me.
Right.
But on government documents, whatever. But I was 17 when I had a late birthday, October. So I was just late in terms of not having been 18 when I decided to start the school year. And so there's a Chinese proverb. Okay, my parents are from Taiwan. There's a Chinese proverb that says, you would not use a good piece of steel to make a nail in the same way that you would not take a good man and turn him into a soldier. Okay. That is like a fundamental like proverb in the culture, which is why I think not only Chinese, but just general Asian culture can be, and there's some like Japanese and Korean, I would not put in this category, but generally are non-combative, non-martial, non-militant, this sort of attitude. And so when, Hogwarts came around and I started thinking about West Point and I mentioned to my parents, they were like, hell no, right? Like, are you kidding me? No way you're going to go to that place. It's like throwing away your life. It's like going to prison, not like what I just described, minimum security prison,
right,
with a strong vocational program, like actually prison. They actually think it's the equivalent of like you're throwing away your life.
Right.
And then my friends are like, why would the military? Why would you ever go to the military? Don't they like make you do push-ups and throw dirt in your face?
Right.
It just thinks it's the stupidest thing ever. Right.
Right.
And so to answer your question, like I ended up having to, do a little signature and once I got in and started, and then some people started actually praising, me to my parents of having taken that plunge. Then they were like, "Oh, okay, this is fine." It's actually
so
we're so proud of our son.
we're proud. What a patriot! Yeah, we're patriotic.
So this kind of establishes a pattern. At least it's 2 points showing that maybe the pizza receipt or the pizza incident was not a singular decision in your life to break the rules.
I know. Yeah, no, I love breaking rules. I also joke around sometimes that I think if I stayed in the conventional army, I probably would have went to jail at some point.
Yeah.
Eventually. Yeah. Whereas, look, and I think Jack, or you guys know this as well, is that there was this conventionalization happening to SF, like in the 2000s. I don't know if this is still hotly discussed topic. Something I felt strongly about. I felt that Okinawa, at least in my era, was very much still holding on to that Vietnam kind of age of how ODA teams operated, the independence. I noticed when I went to 10th group and 5th groups battalions, people walked in each other's team rooms without knocking. Like the doors were just open, and I thought that might have been a function of how closely ODAs work together in Iraq and, in joint team missions and things like this. In Okinawa, dude, if you try to walk into a team room without knocking, you're going to get your ass kicked. Right. It is serious business. You knock and you wait outside until that team allows you to grace them with, to allow you to come into the team room. Right. It's a really big deal. And there's like little things like that culture-wise that I understand that used to be prevalent across SF, but it kind of went away as team went. So anyway, kind of going off a tangent here.
No, it's an interesting little cultural detail.
Andrew added, I know USMA had one eggnog-fueled riot, so that's at least one good story.
Well, okay. Because I just went recently and we're going over a few stories, I'll share like one of my most fun memories is, and again, I have no idea if they do this anymore, but during the Christmas dinner before cadets are released and allowed to go home for 2 weeks, which is a really big deal, obviously, there's a big dinner, Christmas dinner in the mess hall. And in the middle of the dinner, they start singing 12 Days of Christmas all together. And as they go through 12 Days of Christmas, when you hit 5 golden rings, they'll sing it out all slowly. And then each iteration, each table, and there's 4,000 cadets in the mess hall, right? Eating it simultaneously. They'll grab the tables and then lift them up as you sing 5 golden rings. And each iteration, the cadets get crazier and crazier and stack more and more chairs. They get higher and higher and higher. So it looks like a circus kind of thing. Like it gets really dangerous and very, very high. Like you'll actually stack other tables on top of the tables and those stories and stuff like that. And all the cadets are lifting up this table, and cadets will get on top of the tables as well and lifting up, and everybody's singing 5 golden rings. It's the best feeling at West Point is that Christmas song. So my first year, senior year, Army became more political correct, blah, 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 blah. They're like, no more table raising, like maybe like 2 days prior to the Christmas dinner, which everybody looks forward to. They said, no raising tables. And everyone's like, what the fuck? Like grumbling. Blah, blah, blah. So we go into the dinner, and there's officers everywhere standing around watching us like hawks to see whether or not we're going to lift the tables. And lo and behold, as you might imagine, after a few iterations where cadets are kind of like sitting on their hands and getting irritated, somebody breaks out and starts trying to lift up the table over 5 golden rings, and all the officers swarm like sharks over there to try to get them to stop. But the next one, another table goes up, and then eventually by the end, it was just mayhem, and the whole thing was going out singing 5 golden rings. And that is the number one best memory that I have from West Point, where we all collectively said, fuck you, right at the bell, and said, we're doing this tradition. You can't take Christmas away from us. You can take everything away from us, but you're not taking this. Right. And that's I'll share that as my favorite memory, in terms of West Point.
That's great. Can Gene talk about General Sun Li Jin at all, ROC General and VMI grad?
Oh man, I'm sorry. I don't know who that is. Okay. Yeah, I apologize. Yeah.
He said the Merchant Marine Academy uses Comic Sans, I think, for their recruiting pamphlets.
Okay, that's funny. That's a horrible font. I think everybody agrees. That's a horrible font. Yeah.
Thank you, Jackson. What was life like on a SIF troop compared to traditional ODA life? How much better was the training, funding, and op tempo? And you talked about this a little bit. Do you feel like qualitative that it was better, or was it just different?
Yeah, this is a great SF kind of topic. Just different. It's definitely not better. I think these are gone now, right? I think the SIF is gone now.
Yeah.
But is that true? Yeah, the SIFs are gone now. So there's a lot of SIF hating in the battalions that had the SIFs, because there's a perception that the SIFs get treated on a pedestal and higher. Maybe they get a little bit more funding and equipment, here and there. But the experience as at least as a team leader, like when you're an ODA team leader, like you have so much freedom, with your team to do what you think is necessary. Like you plan out and have so much control over your training, your schedules, almost like even the missions you go on that you almost like bid for and pitch for. And that autonomy completely goes out the window as a team leader in a SIF. You're basically a squad leader, right? Because you're part of a larger troop now that is focused on direct action, et cetera, et cetera. So from a personal satisfaction and job satisfaction perspective, I used to actually have dreams when I was in the SIF that I would somehow got fired and then went back to Bravo Company to be an ODA team leader, just because I was just happier there from the autonomy. Now, the other side that was great about the SIF is sometimes you hear grumbling of SIF haters say like, oh, what's so special about them? We do the same thing. We do door kicking and all that type of stuff. The levels are like apples and oranges, honestly. You go through Sephardic, like that course at range 37 is absolutely insane. Like the skill level and the standards what's required to pass that course in terms of combat marksmanship, shoot house, all that type of stuff. I mean, it is incredible. And there's a high attrition rate as well, right? And it's a real thing to graduate the course and come out, and that everybody in the SIF is Sephardic qualified. When you're in a regular ODA, just having one or two guys like that is like huge, to help train the rest of the team. Mm-hmm. So imagine again, you have like 60 dudes who are all Sephardic qualified. And then go back to the concept of like, somebody told me once, one of my mentors said, hey, just because you go to airborne school and do those 4 jumps, when you come out of that, are you a paratrooper? Like, are you really comfortable being like, yeah, I can do airborne operations? Right. No, man. Like, you just have like the driver's license that allows you to participate now. Right. You need a lot more time before you could really call yourself an expert at any of that, And that's something that I would share is for maybe other, SF guys that know a little bit more about Sephardic and everything, is that Sephardic is just that ticket that you're allowed to participate in the SIF. And then the SIF itself will continue on with intense train ups and everything. Like, takes it a whole another level. It is really another level when it comes to direct action. And then also particularly hostage rescue, which is a whole separate thing, right? A very high level specific skill set. So I guess when people ask me like what the difference is that as an individual, you gain some insane skills, which I really think that they should just call that school ninja school. Like learning how to climb over the buildings and, you're upside down, blowing up, windows and coming through them, on rappelling. And it's just crazy, like the things that they have teach you and have you do there. So you learn personal skills, but then maybe from the perspective as a team leader, and then also as a general SF guy, is that I signed on to do the full gamut of unconventional warfare, foreign internal defense. I love that indigenous intermixing with the local populace and figuring out how to leverage them and go the whole by with and through and all that type of stuff. So it was exciting, door kicking and trying that out. But over time, intellectually, for me, I got bored. Right. I like the autonomy and the wide range of missions that only an SF team can do. It's so unique to that mission, right?
RS, thank you. Hell on the Hudson, damn the class of 1902.
I don't know what that means.
Somebody's from the class of 1902? That doesn't make any sense. They're alive.
I don't know.
Hell on the Hudson, damn the class of 1902. Jackson, thanks. Furthermore, what's life like as an 18 Alpha on a SIF troop? Are you as active as the assaulters, snipers, or in the range/house? Best advice for CRF 18 Alphas? Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of like the daily op-tempo life, of course you're at the range, right? Like, you got to shoot with all the guys and make sure that you're on point as well, right? Because when you go on missions, you're a gun too, So on the actual missions, of course, I'm in the back, right? The assault troop commander is running the actual assault itself, right? What I need to be worried about is sticking with the JTAC, the RTO, making sure that if there's a counterattack coming in on us, once we've secured the site, that somebody is not actively engaged that can make the fast decisions of bringing in aircraft and moving, blah, blah, blah. So to be honest, like as a SIF team leader or SIF troop commander, my job was pretty easy because I had really awesome assault troop commanders who just ran the whole raid, right? And I just kind of showed up after it was cleared, moved up to the top. Yeah, sometimes we had to move forces around, whatever, based off of contingency plans. But in terms of training, yeah, you got to be on the range. There's no like JV status for you as the team leader in terms of your ability to shoot, move, and communicate. You need to be able to perform at the same level or better because you're meant to set the example and lead, right? You can't just show up and not be the same, right? So.
Out of curiosity, I mean, I know that on the SIF, you guys had the Iraqi special forces and, your advisors and whatnot. I know with like Ranger Battalion, because people think of like a raid and they think of maybe a SWAT team who are doing it in a permissive environment. You can have a small element because you don't have to worry about anybody coming in from your flanks. So when you have Rangers, they have enough support to sort of do their own cordon and their own security, and some of the other tier 1 units, they have access to other units. For you guys, were you mostly relying on the indigenous, or was it easy for you to get U.S. forces to do that external security for you and whatnot?
Yeah, so it invariably depended on the mission, of course, right? Like, and who had an interest in and a stake in the game on the actual hit itself. For the most part, my experience in Iraq was always with indigenous, right? Okay. So, like I said, the first mission was with the Peshmerga. We recruited them and built them into strike forces from scratch, right? Taught them how to shoot, all this type of stuff. And then the second one, I just fell in on this like badass, like hardened, Iraqi CTF dudes who were like, it seemed like, 100 times more combat than any of us had at that point. Right. But those guys, mostly for the most part, they were the first to the door as well. Right. There were a few times that in both trips that we did do unilateral missions, right? Just based off just the circumstance and the way we split off or the way that the mission unfolded. My first team sergeant was very good about making sure to spread out the responsibilities. So I had the chance, or he kind of forced me to be like the gunner, on some of the convoys and feel that fear being out there when, there's an IED and being the first guy explodes, and all that type of stuff, as well as on some raids being the number one man through the door, putting, the explosive on and running it through. And that's the same case in both missions. And I thought that was a good experience, not only in just the sense of like showing everybody that, hey, I'm willing to take the same risk as well, of course. Right. But then number two, actually understanding like, yeah, that is scary. Right. Number one man, it is scary to be the gunner and understanding what our guys are going through every time they are going through and being the number one guy. And so I thought that was very a good call
that's important, I think, sometimes for an officer or a leader in general to have those experiences, to know what other people are going through.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's hard to describe, right? Like, without being the number one man, right? And you're standing on that dark ass street and you're putting it on there, man, like that pucker factor and how your heart's going and the metal butterflies in your stomach. That's hard to explain, right? Like, to really communicate that as the commander or team leader, like, until I felt that, and I really understood and was much more sympathetic about making sure to rotate this position, as evenly as possible, and ship this out. There's a lot of considerations. Yeah. And I agree. I think it's very important to step in the shoes of as many folk as you can to try to get the context, right? Right. The personal context of what they're going through as well.
Right. Gene, let's talk about your post-service career. You got out of the military, embarked on some various commercial endeavors. It sounds like what really kind of changed things for you was when you got involved with rescuing a Taiwanese citizen from the Philippines. And that was the catalyst in some ways for the creation of your company, Blackpanda. Could you walk us through a little bit about that, about your experience getting out of the military, the rescue, and the company you founded?
Yeah, sure. So after I got out of the military, I went to go study Chinese intensively at Taiwan, and then spend a year at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. I didn't finish. I was poached out of the school when I was on a career trek in Hong Kong by my current co-founder and chairman, Matthew Pecco, who actually was a SIF team leader as well out of Okinawa, which is 20 years before me, right? And actually almost the same team even. And so he is at the time was serving as head of one of the major divisions of Credit Suisse, the investment bank. And we basically met for, I would say, like about 10 minutes. And he's just like, what are you doing? I'm poaching you out of grad school. And why don't you come trade equity for me on the, and join Wall Street, right? And so that, to be honest, at the time, I didn't know what an investment bank was, but knew that this was a great opportunity, and looked at the paycheck, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'm going to skip school, come down here and see what this is all about. So I went down to Hong Kong and I traded equity swaps across Pan Asia, 12 hours a day, 6 screens, trading floor, all the the type of stuff that you see in the movies, with all that. So it was a really interesting experience as well. To be honest, I didn't like it. So I left after a short period of time and went down to Singapore to help start up Palantir Technologies Asia division. This is early days before it became a very large company, but still pretty large at the time. And that's where I started getting reconnected into my tech roots, as well as with cyber, right? And so after I left Palantir, I was getting ready to join some smaller startups and take a bigger leap into entrepreneurship and start that road. And I get a call out of the blue when I'm in Hong Kong, and my mother tells me that her best friend from childhood, his younger sister, was kidnapped, out of a Malaysian resort in the middle of the night, and her husband was shot 8 times, and killed, and she's just gone, and nobody knows what's going on. And my mom was in Taiwan visiting family at the time. I had some spare cycles, so I jumped over to Taiwan to go see her. And the news was just all over Taiwan. Like nothing like this happens in Taiwan to Taiwanese citizens. It's a very, very safe place, right? And so for me, I mean, with the experience, we just talked about, I realized immediately, I was like, that's probably Abu Sayyaf, right? I mean, like where she got kidnapped was in Borneo, near Sipidon Island. It's a place called Pom Pom Island. So Sipidon's a really famous diving location, and so her really good friend Angela, who had come back to Taiwan from the States to try to handle the situation, reached out and asked to have breakfast and just get some advice. And when I went to have the breakfast and the whole Chang clan came out, I realized very quickly that because of Taiwan's status not being recognized as a full country, even though it operates completely as such, right? Totally autonomous government, military, political, currency, etc. It's not recognized. It doesn't have any formal diplomatic channels with any, only a few handful of small countries around the world, not the Philippines. So there's no police, law enforcement, military, real connection between the two. And so when I listened to the situation, I heard that basically a low-ranking police officer from the anti-kidnapping group was just assigned, and all they were doing was liaisoning about the progress. I was like, dude, Jack's been in the Philippines. You knew nothing was happening, right? Nobody is helping them at all with this. And I had a bit of time off, so went back into the country and started calling. When I looked at them in their faces and realized like nobody is going to help you with this. I spent all those years helping, I believed helping people in Iraq and other places that, to be honest, were all strangers and I don't stay in contact with, really, right? What was all for. And now here's somebody who is very important to our family, right? My mother, and I have some skills and connections that might be able to help in the situation, and decided that I couldn't look at myself in the mirror and not at least help a little bit. So I ended up getting on a plane, going out of Manila, and trying to connect it with previous contacts who were no longer in the positions of power, like Ramon Dizon and these types, right? But could introduce me to their buddies who would replace them and see whether or not we could get something going. So I try to keep the story a little bit shorter, but essentially we put together a group of Filipino Scout Rangers who were able to help tremendously. Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Ecklerin, who is a 93 West Point grad and showed up with a connection through another West Point connection, came up and about a week in and said, hey, I'm going to help you, West Pointer to West Pointer. Scout Rangers have intel assets in the camp that your family friend is being held. We have eyes on, right? And we also found a group of private military contractors that were just living almost, to be honest, maybe in exile in the Philippines, kind of shadier characters from the European countries, etc. These two groups essentially transacted the recovery, I'll call it, of Evelyn. Okay, and we were able to. Because I'm trying to save this story for some other purposes.
Sure.
So I'll just talk a little bit around it. But basically, in the exchange, we were able to use technical devices to track their locations, and I gave that and wrote the plan, in terms of the follow-on raids for the Scout Rangers. And once we got Evelyn out, they followed on and hit the Abu Sayyaf about 4 times and killed like 37 of them, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a recovery, and then the action happened afterwards through the Filipino Scout Rangers, right? And the problem previously was that every time they made contact, the Abu Sayyaf, if you recall, are very good at ripping banana leaves off the trees and then putting their wounded and then spiriting them off into the jungle, which is, the terrain is like their backhand, right? And so the problem is they make contact, make maybe a few casualties, and then they disappear. Mm-hmm. So by being able to put a technical device, on them, mm-hmm. They made contact, immediately followed on a pursuit in 3 successive raids, and made a pretty big impact according to them in terms of KIA.
That's fantastic.
And you're writing a book about this, right, Gene?
Yeah, so it's been a long time. A lot of people have been talking about this. When my story came out, there was a lot more attention than I expected. Because it was
Especially in Taiwan.
Yeah, Taiwan was huge, right? That really shocked me when I got back, and for about a week, my face, my entire life and story was being broadcast every major news channel in Taiwan, like 4-page spreads on me, and like in every newspaper. Because the thing that made the story really big was that I was an unknown entity as the nephew of the sitting president of Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou, right? And so if you can imagine, right, like the Taiwanese people are like, oh man, like one of our citizens got kidnapped yet again. Our government and status is so impotent. We're in this horrible place that we can't help our own people. And then suddenly the president's nephew, who's this West Point Special Forces dude, goes in and turns her back, and everybody's mind's just like, right. It just exploded. And so the story was really big. It was, I kind of joke around about it now because it's now it's like 8 years later. It was like a 15 minutes of like boy band fame in Taiwan around it. Like I'd walk around, the streets, and people would run out of cafes and restaurants to take photos with me and just say the most, just incredibly ingratiating things to me. It was obviously it was fun. And so it was a really big story there. And then there's a lot of attention around that and people contacting. But after the initial media blast and kind of coming out a little bit, it's kind of like, man, I don't really know why, like I care to tell the details of the story. Like, what do I really, where am I forwarding my interest and time around that? And so I kind of just pushed it off for a long time. And then now, actually what's brought me back to the table to tell the story, and I've signed I'm signed by a United Talent agency, right, to do this. We're getting ready to submit the proposals in and everything like that, and get the story out, is because I realized that my story, might have use in the platform of telling just an Asian American story. Right, particularly with what's gone on in the States. I'm watching that from afar in Asia and quite appalled at all of that. And if nothing else, I hope that my story can come out and for me to be a platform and be like, hey, don't ignore us. We're here. Right. There are folk with backgrounds like myself that contribute, and don't overlook us, right? And don't, many things I could say along those lines about what's going on with the perception of Asians in the States, and hope that my story can come out as, hey, here's one story that to just bring more eyeballs.
I really look forward to reading it, Gene, and we're really just scratching the surface with you here tonight. So I hope we can have you back on the show at some point.
And definitely when the book comes out, please, we want to have you back on.
So talk to us about how this rescue then kind of led you to forming a security company and founding Blackpanda.
Yeah, so the thing that was a unintended and ancillary benefit was that with my name coming out and being a semi-known figure around Asia, was that people were very fascinated by me, like particularly investors, right, businessmen, etc. I kind of joke around about it sometimes, like, oh, I'm a zoo animal, right? Like I can get meetings because people just are interested to meet me. And then it's up to me to be like, okay, here's my business agenda, what I'm interested in. But I can usually get, for a period of time, it was very easy for me to get that first meeting. And that's what helped propel me into more of like the entrepreneur role, where it was not, I don't want to say it was easy, but easier for sure from my previous status of meeting high net worth individuals that were willing to cut, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million to me, because they believed in, hey, just this person seems like he's very capable, and believe in supporting what business initiative that I was undertaking. So that's one aspect of just being able to raise capital, in terms of an idea. It was a little bit ill-advised, I would say, but the original Blackpanda group, like, we just thought it'd be really cool if we just got super smart SF guys together, because we're so awesome, and we'll just figure out a business. Right. That was more or less how we started, and ventured into security consulting, and that it's a long story around this. And there was the pivot to where we went, but essentially where we made a major turn and the business was struggling, because if you ever start a business, it's a horrible idea to just be like, what do I think is cool? Right. and just start it. No, you need to find out what other people think is cool and will buy and actually pay for it, right? The market is what you need to talk to. And so in mid 2017, the Resorts World Manila, where we had an office in the Philippines, was attacked by gunmen and burned down half the casino. 37 people died, etc. We were hired by Resorts World to be the physical crisis responders to help them get their gaming license back and fix the security. The second day or third day that this happened, a whole bunch of cyber attack started coming into the casino, taking advantage of all the physical chaos and exploiting the confusion, and money was being stolen and ripped out. And so I went forward to help the company try to find cyber incident responders or cyber firefighters, right? Kind of like crisis cyber guys. It's a huge field in the States, which is the most developed cyber market in the world, et cetera, and discovered that there was no such real boutique capability like that in Asia. And so we put together a hodgepodge group of folk, ended up making a lot of money, more money actually, on this, I think on the cyber side and the physical side of that deal. And I realized, whoa, this is a way better business
Right.
than being physical security side, right? And at that point, we had already started working with Lloyd's of London on trying to tie an insurance component to the physical security. We were delving a little bit into kidnap and ransom insurance, political violence insurance, and then us being the services that are paid for with the insurance policy that gets delivered to the client. And so I learned a lot about that industry and how that worked. And so after even Evelyn Chang and everything like that, I've handled numerous kidnap and ransom negotiations and cases, which is an interesting and actually very fulfilling line of work as well, but just not very lucrative because it's just happened enough, right? But you know what happens a lot right now is ransomware and cyber attack.
Right.
And it's just blowing up, right? And so what I saw was an opportunity to take a lot of things that I learned from the physical security world. And, I like to still consider myself a classically military trained tactician and strategist. And I fundamentally believe that cybersecurity is not an IT problem. It's a security problem, right? It's not a computer that's hacking on the other side. It's a human being. And that human being has friends that are organized. They have different desired end states and thus different avenues of approach and different courses of action that they can take. It's just straight up old school MDMP. There's still terrain analysis rather than jungle, urban, or forest. Now it's digital, but there is key terrain, obstacles, avenues of approach. It all still is there. You just need to figure out and match the terms over to figure out strategy. So I saw a lot of parallels to that. I mean, I have a little bit of advantage because of computer science undergrad and I am technical. And then I try to marry that with my SF background and then a bit of the finance background, getting into insurance and those connections of connecting up in the Lloyd's. So what I'm doing today, what Blackpanda is we're together with our company Panamatics Underwriting. We're the first cybersecurity insurtech firm in Asia. We're partnered with Lloyd's of London, who permits us to underwrite insurance policies up to $5 million US. And essentially, we sell the insurance policy that has Blackpanda attached inside of the policy. So if you get breached or attacked, cyber attack, the policy will trigger not only coverage for your losses, but also pay for all Blackpanda's fees to come in and put out the fire for you. So I make money twice on every client this way. So that's essentially what I'm doing these days. We're headquartered in Singapore, have offices in Hong Kong, Tokyo, Manila, and Kuala Lumpur. So I'm in the middle of raising a large financing round right now and plan to scale the company across most of Asia, actually. We see offices across most of the countries.
So where do your clients tend to be then?
Yeah, so I would say predominantly in actually all across Asia, Hong Kong and Singapore predominantly, because those are our kind of like dual headquarters. We have a lot of enterprise clients in Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand. Like for example, I don't want to name any of the clients. Sorry.
Sure.
We have some very large clients in these regions, and that's where we operate.
Super cool, man. I mean, it's just like an incredible journey from, kind of like nerdy kid in Cupertino, California, to West Point, to special forces officer, to private security guy, and then kind of like all the way back to tech and cyber.
Yeah, nerdy tech kid from Cupertino.
but you took all of those experiences along the way and kind of brought them with you into that field.
Yeah, I think we all do, right? We're all on our own pathway and journey, and the weird twists and turns that we all take end up just leading us faster, I think, than where we're supposed to go. You know what I mean? Like in a lot of ways, whether for better or for worse, right?
Right.
And it's been an odd journey for sure. For the last 20 years, a lot of people sometimes say like, oh yeah, what would you say in terms of like your successes, and how do and I always say like, don't follow anything that I did. That's a horrible idea to go the pathway that I did. That's ridiculous. And in general, when I'm usually giving advice, I try to point out the mistakes I made and tell them and share like, okay, here's the mistakes I made for this. Watch out for this landmine. I would caution, just in general, I share this, is that I think that people who give advice about something that they did well oftentimes forget how much luck was involved in their success. They backward rationalize how awesome they were. Oh yeah, do this. Or also are just like validating their own decisions because they want somebody they think is promising and smart to just do exactly what they did. So that's my take personally when I see people doing that type of
it's interesting because I think that, and you're a great example of this, that it's not just sort of luck that leads you into things, but a lot of times, I mean, those connections that you make in life and your job performance, like how hard you try at something regardless, because we probably all have moments, right? Like your receipt incident. We all have moments that could have ended us or not ended us, but where our life would have been dramatically different if it hadn't have been one person stepping in, one, patron sort of taking us under their wing or taking care of us, somebody making a different decision.
That's right. I would agree with that. I mean, the back to the pizza thing. If I didn't have the pizza incident, I would have gone straight to the SIF. Actually, I was assigned a team there already, and so I would have went straight to that team, and then would have gone a very different career route. Right? Maybe I would have got one deployment to OIF at the time, or to Iraq at the time, and that probably would have been it. And they would have changed a lot of the trajectory of my career, along those lines, in that sense, like the weird happenstance of how many missions I did,
And I mean, can you imagine, I'm sure you would be successful in whatever way you define success, but can you imagine where your life may have gone had that never return order stood if you hadn't had somebody step in?
Yeah. Well, I always try to think like, number one is that, most of human suffering, like all of our mental suffering comes from brooding about the past or worrying about the future. Right. We always think about regretting our previous decisions or worrying about the future. Right. Where we're happiest is we're just present and in the moment. So when I think about the decisions, I guess, so to speak, that have gone on in the past, I try to, right. This is an ideal. Of course, I still worry and brood about and regret things, but I try to think about that decision was done, which was likely made almost in an uncontrollable, emotional, reflexive way, and it's my job just to make it right going forward, right? There's no such things. I've heard this, recently from a professor at Stanford, where I finished this business course this summer, where he said, there's no such thing as right decisions. You just have to make it right afterwards. Right. And I really like that. It's like, I did the pizza thing. Just make it right afterwards for you. Make it work for you after, right? I fucked this up. I fucked that up. Make it right and make it work for you afterwards, right?
Let's get through the user questions.
Yeah, we have a few more questions that people have donated to ask, so we can breeze through these. And I know we've kept you so long, and you've been so generous with your time, and we appreciate it. Alejandro, thank you. He says, dude, what is it about 1-1 and Oki that turns dudes who go there or who come back to Lewis into a bunch of weebs, straight up waifu obsessed?
What's obsessed?
Waifu. Right?
Waifu?
The Japanese, the term for the Japanese, like the ideal wife, waifu.
Oh.
Husbando, waifu. It's a weeb term. Yeah, it's a total anime term.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know too much about that. I mean, I didn't have a lot of interaction with Lewis in my time. I did swing through a couple times, but I don't know. I think that I don't know. I'm just going to riff off of that and just talk about Oki culture a little bit. I mean, so what somebody said to me that kind of recruited me about the idea of going to Okinawa was, he said, nobody says I saw you, so they don't say I was with you in Okinawa, right? They say we were together in Okinawa.
Right.
Like when people talk about the experience of going over there, because it ends up being a insular and very tight-knit community, particularly around the SF community, because when you're in Okinawa, you're at Tori Station, which is this tiny little army base away from the main body of Kadena Air Force Base and some of the Marine Corps bases and everything like that. So you're kind of your own isolated community. And, you know, and obviously there's a little bit of a somewhat, you know, more hush-hush clandestine nature of being an SF and kind of on the side. But, you know, you do come socialized in the main areas and everything like that. But it gives you a sense of, you know, that you're a unique community separate of that, and also that you're just so random, not randomly, of course, there's a very good reason why you're in Okinawa, but away from everybody as a forward deployed battalion, right? Which is, you know, there's only 2 in SF, and it is a unique thing, right? So, yeah, I don't know what else to say about that comment.
Do a lot of guys at first group consider Okinawa like a hardship tour and they don't want to go?
Oh no, I would be shocked if, you know, I don't think anybody feels that way about going to Okinawa. Well, you know, my roommate, West Point grad and still an SF officer, he didn't want to go to Okinawa. He got assigned to go to Okinawa. He wanted to go to 3rd group or 5th group, you know, and be as much in the fight as possible.
Right.
So he was one of the guys that actually left and then went to 10th group after Okinawa. So that's the only, definitely not about living in Okinawa, right?
Okay.
Okinawa is Japan, right? It's a first world country.
Right.
It's super peaceful. It's so beautiful. The ocean. I mean, it's an awesome place to live. You know, I lived on the beach, like stones throw. Like, dude, it's gorgeous. You know, so yeah.
Yeah. Walker, thank you. Any work with 95th Civil Affairs?
Yeah, I mean, some, you know, came across them a couple times in the Philippines. Yeah, I mean, no, I don't have too much to say about that. You know, they have their own mission, and we would see them attached to teams from time to time. Very important mission, right, in terms of civil affairs and engagement with civilian populations.
Sure.
No major comments for me. For kind of just neutral.
Alejandro, being in group response for the PACOM area, do you have any unique or funny JSET stories? Thank you for coming on, Gene. Cheers.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, JSET stories. Trying to think of, I mean, nothing, I'm sorry, nothing really comes to mind right off the bat. I mean, like, you know, I did a lot of them around, well, I will share one thing that I think is maybe kind of interesting then. So one of the units that we stood up in Okinawa is the Japanese Special Operations Group. So this is after the North Koreans admitted to like coming across on the beaches and kidnapping Japanese citizens. Like
we heard, Wino told us about this too. Yeah. No, go ahead.
Yeah. And then so this is crazy, right? When you think about what an awesome SF mission. Like if you just purely from that, can you imagine getting a mission like go swim underwater and kidnap civilians on the beach and drag them back in the water and bring them back to the boat. Anyway, crazy. So that's what they did in the 70s, and they admitted it, I think in the mid 2000s somewhere, that they had kidnapped these Japanese civilians to teach North Koreans Japanese and Japanese culture for their spies and things like this. So the Japanese kicked into gear and were like, okay, we need to plus up some of our own units, and they built an SF unit called SOG. And so they would come down to Okinawa and train with us in the earlier years quite a bit. And they were extremely well funded, extremely professional, almost certainly one of the top, if not top, SF units in Asia almost overnight, right? And one of the funny things I remember when they were in the shoot house once was that one of the things that the Japanese do, and I see this in private sector as well, is that they love pulling out video cameras and just documenting everything, and researching it and watching it again later, and then pouring through all the details and figuring out exactly what it is that you're doing, and then try to not only make sure that they try to mimic all the great things that they're learning from you, and then from there to innovate and improve, right? And so when they came down, in the time that I had a chance to train with them, they were awesome on the range. Like they outshot us actually, which was really shocking. I was, after just such a short period of time of like 4 years. And the thing that I want to share that I thought was quite funny was we did a few runs through the shoot house, and they're all on the catwalks and everything with the cameras. And as soon as we finished and I'm walking back, the Japanese kind of team that I was kind of like attached to or coordinating with, they jumped around me, and there's like 10 video cameras right in front of my face. And they're like, okay, Jin-san, why did you walk after you finished the run? Why did you walk back in the way that you did? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like I didn't walk back in any way. Like the exercise is over, I'm just walking normally. And they're like, no, your walk looks a little bit different. And then they pull out the video and they're like showing me like how I kind of like sauntered back, like maybe I was feeling like a little good about myself, shot some targets, so I was kind of bebopping back a little bit. And they're like, no, your walk is different. Like, is this required? Like after, the shootout, like, how do we learn that walk? And it took me like a while to explain, like, it's not a thing.
Right.
Don't worry about this, and it just shows like a little bit like the cultural mentality.
Yeah, a little obsession. Yeah.
Yeah. Or just the attention to detail. That culture is like, talk about attention to detail. That culture is like, man, it takes that to a whole nother level, So, yeah.
I also just want to announce, guys and folks, we really appreciate, but after we finish these questions, what's on there now, we can't take anymore. We have to let Gene go. As a civilian, it strikes me as weird that 18 Alphas spend relatively little time in command of an A team. Would it make sense to lengthen that time or allow officers join later in their career as an alternative to up or out?
It's an interesting one. So one of the tough things for SF officers is that the timeline. So you remember, like, there's the aspect of like making sure to take care for SF, and then there's the officer's career track as a U.S. Army officer.
Right.
And by going to the Q course, you lose 2 years of time that you're normally in the career track that all the other branches, whether it be infantry, armor, artillery, that you're knocking out certain staff time and certain command times and all this type of stuff. And so actually, when you're competing later on, when you come out of just the strict SF jobs and you're coming out as an SF officer and competing for other staff positions, let's say at the Pentagon or whatever, you're like way behind. Okay, your timeline was compressed where you're missing certain things. And particularly like if you're a team leader like me, who ended up getting 2 teams and then longer time, right? I was on a team for like 44 months or something like that. And so I was a little bit longer than the normal team leader. It's meant to, generally speaking, on average, it should be like 24 months, right? Mm-hmm. So in terms of getting more team time, actually, I have a West Point classmate who was an officer and then ended up, his story was he didn't want to leave the team. So he became an 18 Bravo, mm-hmm. right? And then became a warrant. And so he showed up to the 20-year class reunion in his Green Beret, and he's like a CW3.
That's awesome.
And on a team, right? So it's like, so I think like for officers that want to stay on a team, then you have the option to do so, just don't be an officer.
Right.
Right? Like the team leader is just meant to be there for a short period of time. The team is run by the team sergeant, right? The NCOs run the team. The team leader is there to get, there's a role obviously on the team itself, but that's just the beginning of the officer's career, right? He's only like a late 20s, individual that has this whole track record of things to go through and, all the higher ranks and everything like that. So it's difficult to say, for officers to go back to a team. Right. It doesn't quite make sense career track. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Isaac. Why is the invasion in Philippines complicated?
I'm not sure what he means by that.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Let's go on.
Just for the record, I shouldn't call it an invasion. It wasn't like, it's not like America or anybody or the Philippines invade anywhere. It was just the operation was
an amphibious raid.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Jackson. How rare is it seeing former CIF 18 Alphas go to the unit or TFO, like a tier 1 unit? Do many 18 Alphas regret commissioning just because of lack of team time?
Yeah, so I think that there's nothing special about the CIF being a place to ascend into tier 1 units. I think that's important, and kind of actually that question kind of bellies why there was a lot of CIF hating from other SF, because it isn't like another level up, really, right? It's like, yes, you got to go to a specialty school and everybody went to that specialty school and has a very specific skill set. Mm-hmm. That's the way I try to describe the CIF. So just in general, in terms of ascending into tier 1 units, then that's just equal opportunity for everybody across the board, right? And so whether you're SF or not, right? Then the other question, sorry, about more team time again. There seems to be a lot of questions like,
do many 18 Alphas regret? Yeah, do many Alphas regret commissioning just because of lack of team time? And actually, there might be another question that we can just include with that from Brad, and we can add this to it. Ever wish you went enlisted? Win in SF. So I think that they kind of
Yeah, I'd share like the happiest time that I was ever just like whether Q course or all the way through team time. The happiest I ever was during the alpha portion of the Q course where I was the junior echo on the team, and I was not in charge, right? And all I had to do was worry about making sure this radio,
Right.
and which I still didn't do a very good job of, but that's all I had to worry about, right?
Right.
Was getting the SINGARs up, and so yeah, definitely there's a lot of times that it would have been a lot more fun just to be one of the boys, right? I mean, it's very lonely being the team leader
Sure.
in many missions and cases, right? When I was in Kurdistan, I mean, like, dude, like we were out there just by ourselves, right, out in Rill, and like the boys are all hanging out, and there's certain things that you just don't get invited to. You're the nerd on the team,
Right.
Like,
Right.
let's be honest, right? You're gonna get made fun of all the time, and like it's awkward, right? It's kind of like, man, I just get like shit on, like socially all the time. But I think I'm a pretty cool guy, and just,
Right. Right.
like just kind of outcasted, And so yes, so definitely there's many times, and I think every SF officer, especially when you're a team leader, you wish many times that you could just be one of the boys.
Yeah.
Like how it feels when you're going through the courses, and it's much more. I think you guys know this from all the schools too, right? When you're in schools, whether Ranger School or Q course, and we're all students, the difference, the separation between NCOs and officers or enlisted is it's much more blurry, right? We're all suffering together equally, and we're all teammates, et cetera. Like that is the best camaraderie feeling that I ever had, whether when I was training or doing missions in the Army. So for sure, definitely along those lines. But at the same time, and I will say this because, there's a culture where SF officers are, if you don't constantly fight to try to stay on a team nonstop, like it's viewed very negatively. Like, why don't you want to stay on a team? And you're supposed to fight for that and get a second team and all this type of stuff. I would share definitely by the end of my team time, I was done. Like at that point, like I was ready to do something else because I wasn't growing and learning as fast as what I wanted, which fundamentally is why anybody even does any job or stays in any job. You need to feel like you're learning and growing all the time, right? That's what keeps people engaged. And so for me, I kind of seen, because I was an experienced team leader at that point.
Ready to move on.
I was ready to move on. Like, how many more JSETs can I do that I'm going to see something new? I wasn't, or, even going on missions and things like this, I was ready to move on. Yeah.
Right.
So for me, it was time. Yeah.
So this, if you don't watch the show, this is totally an inside show question, but just give it your best guess. What do you think the price of a giraffe on the black market is?
Price of a giraffe on the black market
In the United States. We'll say in the United States.
In USD.
Yeah.
Oh, in the U.S.
In the U.S.
Do I get the context? Like, is there something valuable on the giraffe?
No.
No. It's just a giraffe owned by like a drug dealer on his exotic
Zoo.
back 40.
I read once that a tiger only costs like $250. So it might not be that. Yeah, I've read a tiger cub is only like $250. What ends up happening is the cost of feeding it and maintaining it.
Dude, I'll buy a tiger cub right now and keep it in the studio.
Right, but then what I just said, like the cost of maintaining it, like giving it
Figure
goats.
that out later.
Like,
How big can it get?
And this is our time to pitch our patron. If you guys want to see us get a tiger cub and raise it in the studio, we need money, funding for the feeding and the raising, as Gina said.
You can call Carol Baskins from Tiger.
Yeah.
just got a few. Okay, giraffe. Then because of that data that I think is correct on the tiger, I'm gonna go with a low number. I'm gonna go with like, I don't know. I think like a few $1,000.
Wow, man.
Yeah.
Do you remember what it was?
It was like 30. It was like 36,000.
Was it 36?
Yeah.
I thought it was lower than that, but
Even 36, when we talk about like higher numbers, that's not that much.
that's not that much. I
Yeah.
mean, it's about the price of a Prius, right?
If we had a higher ceiling, maybe.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we'll need a hippo. Jim, it seems that cybersecurity is a popular field for former retired SF officers. Is that the future of unconventional warfare?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. So number one, I didn't realize that a lot of officers were getting into cyber. I'd love to know who they are and network with them. But I do think that, and I'm glad that question got asked, because I do think that veterans should, if they're listening, should look at the cybersecurity industry. The background that we have dealing with stressful. Yeah. Okay. So the background that we have dealing with stressful crisis scenarios, as well as, again, like I was talking earlier about the fundamentals of security, the fundamentals of patrolling, these all apply and are translatable into cyber to a certain degree. What you're missing is the technical capabilities, right? I mean, you're not trained on the 240, right? You're not trained on the M60. You just don't know how to operate the systems. And that requires some technical training. But the GI Bill will cover your cybersecurity training, right? And I saw, by the way, I still don't get this, why people who served after 2011 have like an unlimited amount of time for GI Bill, and then guys like us, that came in.
It's really weird. Yeah, it's really weird, that cutoff point.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so if you have GI Bill left, the SANS Institute, SANS, is the US kind of like gold standard of cybersecurity courses. And for us, when we hire, the SANS courses and the certifications, man, if you just have one of those, you're going to get a job. Maybe not from us, sorry, I should say that, but just generally, if you have a certification in one of those SANS courses, which is usually about a week long and like $8,000, and then you take the test, you're going to get a cyber job. Like there's 3 million jobs in cybersecurity in the US alone that are unfilled and desperately looking for people. So a lot of people get intimidated because they think it's very technical, but the truth is actually right now is that it is a bridge that can be crossed. And it's just about time against the skill set that you need to learn and just be willing to dive in, right? I feel like a lot of veterans might have a blocker mentally, similarly to what we were describing earlier, where people show up to selection or
self-assessing. Yeah.
Correct. You're self-assessing yourself out, and you don't need to. Like, if the GI Bill is willing to pay for it, take the money, get the training, and then just go out there and see. I think there's a huge opportunity for people transitioning. Cybersecurity eclipsed over $1 trillion of cybercrime losses last year. It is this year already larger than the global drug trade. If it wasn't for COVID, and people are already talking about cyber nonstop in the States. If it wasn't for COVID, it would be even more. There's so much cyber attack going on. It's insane. Our phone is ringing off the hook in Asia with business. And I don't see it stopping its growth in our lifetimes. The technology advance and how things are being created so quickly as people rush to market with different products and introducing cybersecurity flaws in every single one, it's just exponentially increasing this problem. There's a lot of good business and money to be made. And I think getting back to the roots of a lot of things of what veterans were attracted to by joining the military, right? Of defending, getting utility out of a specific skill and mindset as a warrior, which is now translated and distributed or communicated through digital means, right? Yeah. Which, to the person's question, is unconventional warfare. I think that's a good application of unconventional warfare for sure, right? Like getting in, rather than putting boots on the ground, why not penetrate the network systems and disrupt and whatnot and soften up the target beforehand or gather intelligence. I actually have gone so far to write some articles about how I think that air-land battle doctrine will be changed by cyber warfare as well. So for people that don't know that one, in the 1980s, the Soviets wrote something called air-land battle doctrine, which has become kind of the standard of conventional invasion, conventional warfare invasion, where you get air superior force and air superiority first, and then you follow on with the land forces, right? You soften up the target and come in. What's safer than even air power coming in? Obviously, just sitting back behind your computer,
right?
And things like the colonial pipeline hack that happened in the U.S. About the Russians potentially interfering with elections and pushing out on social media, fomenting disruption and social unrest in the States. Absolutely, this is unconventional warfare,
right?
And I think it's going to be the front lines. As things continue to mature, I believe that you'll be able to take out, I think the great powers of the world right now, US, China, Europe, blah, blah, blah. I think that entire warfare can be fought via cyber right now and be decided before you can even bring in physical forces.
When you start talking about not just computers, but IoT, OT, I mean, and OT is such an incredibly vulnerable field right now. Operational technology is such an incredibly vulnerable field that, I mean, it's like you say. I mean, you can prep, do preparation of the battlefield without ever deploying a single, armed force.
Yep, that's right. That's right. I mean, again, I think the most alarming hack that we saw recently in headlining news was the Colonial Pipeline.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Actually disrupting a national security asset.
Right.
A resource, a national security resource, fuel, right, gas. Like these sort of things can get arrested by the right cyber attack, and if it's not defended the right way. And I think that's the front lines. To be honest.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Last couple questions.
Yeah. Did your actions in Taiwan get China's attention?
Not like, I mean, nobody from the government reached out, if it means like that. Certainly some Chinese media and whatnot were interested in it because of the political nature of my affiliation in Taiwan and whatnot. But I mean, generally, I would say that there's some exposure in China around that. But yeah.
Would you feel comfortable taking a vacation to Beijing?
Probably not, because I've just been there many times and it sucks. So I've traveled extensively in China, exploring after I got out, looking around and seeing what things were like there. I've traveled in China and whatnot. It's I'm getting that you guys have not.
I have not.
I haven't.
I am not.
Yeah, I mean, look, the impression of China right now, I mean, it's it's extremely polluted. When I went to Beijing, you can't see across the street. It's so polluted, right? The deep amount of fog and all this type of stuff. Obviously, when you go there, you get a magnitude of the size of China. And we look at the cities and see 30 million people when you're on a skyscraper, and get the size of how big that place is and everything like that. I don't know where the conversation is going. I just kind of
Thank you, Jerry. There's last two questions. What do you think about Russian hackers?
Yeah, so they're considered right now to be the best. They have the fastest recorded dwell times, which is the amount of time that it takes for them to penetrate endpoints. They're very prolific. Look, if I were a smart kid in Russia or another country that didn't have a government or police force that could come after me, I would do nothing but attack and hack people and steal their money. Right? How else am I gonna, right? You can't come get me. So, right, like let's say I'm in Nigeria, which a lot of attacks are coming out of as well these days, particularly cyber financial crime. I would sit there because I know that the government can't come get me, right? And sit there and just try to steal as much Bitcoin as I possibly could, right? Sure. And so, just a side comment about it, Russia right now has one of the largest. So China has the largest volume of hacks. Russia has a smaller concentration, but is extremely effective and very high level. Interesting stat: the dark web, 40% of the dark web is in Cyrillic. Really? To give you a little sense, it's not in Chinese. Yeah, it's not in Chinese; it's in Cyrillic. And kind of demonstrating the prolificness of Russian hackers. For sure, they're top flight. Yeah, top notch.
And then last question, Isaac. Thank you. I wasn't able to join the military, but I want to major in cybersecurity, and I hope to do special ops because of. He wants to do special ops or work in that kind of field in cybersecurity. What should he do to get there?
Yeah, they should apply to the NSA. So the NSA has kind of a Delta Force unit there that does. It's called Tailored Access Operations. This is open information. I have never worked there. This is me from open source information. But we do see CVs of these type of people come around. They come out and start very successful cybersecurity companies. So that's the unit that kind of has the lore, of being the most elite offensive cybersecurity unit in the States. There's another one in Israel that's bandied around quite a bit because there's a ton of really amazing Israeli cybersecurity startups that have come out and then now come to the States and brought their products and services here. Their unit is called Unit 8200, and that's kind of like the Israeli cybersecurity military unit as comparison point. But to this person's particular question, it would be if you want to go to the top, then it's NSA. I mean, certainly there's channels in the military as well. Every Army, Navy, Air Force, et cetera, has some type of cyber command and cyber unit there in the military too. But on the more civilian side, we're talking NSA and the other three-letter agencies. Yeah.
Gene, this has really been an awesome, informative conversation. Is it okay if I steal just another 10 minutes of your time? Is that all right?
Good.
Thanks, man. And just to wrap up the main format of this show, thank you everyone who joined us tonight and spending your Friday evening with us and hearing some of Gene's stories and experiences. And we really appreciate him joining us tonight. Make sure you go down in the description of this website. There's a link to our Patreon if you want to get involved in supporting the channel and have access to the bonus segments. Please give us a thumbs up. Share the video with your friends. Spread it around. Let people know about what we're doing here.
And Gene, for people who it's blackpanda.com.
Yeah, blackpanda.com.
Okay. And then no word on your book yet. People can't pre-order that or anything at this point, can they?
They can go and check out the Yellow Green Beret series. There's 3 of them.
That's right. The
and
Yellow Green Beret series.
They're up on Amazon. Highly recommended. They're really funny too. So hope you guys will go give them a read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks everybody. We really appreciate it. Gene, we really appreciate you.
Next week, Ray McPadden, Ranger Battalion officer, he wrote "We March at Midnight" about his time in Afghanistan.